Hello everyone. Today, a very interesting story awaits you. And before it starts, I would like to ask you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. A powerful hand holds a sword. This is the Dark Lord, the Demon King, and indeed his name is cursed. He is the ruler over all evil. His dark armored figure sits on a throne, and a faint yellow light falls from above, as if to emphasize the gloomy and majestic image. There is not a single creature in the world that can stand up to this cruel king. The expression of the ominous face in the semi-darkness is frightening, and the play of light and shadows complements the tense and menacing atmosphere. Breaking the wall with his foot, a man in armor enters the room and calls the owner. The knight orders the Dark Lord to come out. To this call, the latter replies that he was not going to hide. The man takes off his helmet and says that he is pleased to meet the Lord, and then he adds that he came to kill that one. The blonde warrior looks at his opponent calmly and confidently. His whole figure radiates nobility, strength, and majesty. The man solemnly announced that he was the conqueror, named Firkin the Strong. The Dark Lord, interested in such insolence, said that the opponent had too much pride. The warrior disdainfully ordered the host to be silent, to which he reacted quite calmly, but wanted to say something. But just at that moment, an explosion sounded behind the warrior. The Dark Lord formed a new ball of fire. A dark figure in heavy armor offered the uninvited guest not to immerse himself in the rules of etiquette and do without social conversations. A bright, purple glow began to fill the room. With a menacing look, the Lord of Evil offered to immediately put an end to the matter that had arisen between him and the man. Firkin Strong did not agree to such a proposal of the host. After all, he had so diligently prepared his speech for several years, and the Lord unceremoniously interrupted it in mid-sentence. The warrior said that such behavior of the owner did not please him at all and diverted attention from the essence of the prepared speech. The Dark Lord, threatening with a sword, angrily ordered the restless guest to shut the door. The ruler asked the warrior why he had appropriated the title of the strongest, because there are many other people in the world. Cursing at his abuser, Firkin angrily threw the Dark Lord away from humiliating him. After all, the strongest conqueror appeared before him. The warrior announced that he was the chosen one, and it was up to him to eradicate all evil. Pointing his sword against his master, the knight announced that he had come to cut off his head. The warrior menacingly said that he was holding a majestic inheritance in his hand, a holy sword full of glory which eradicates all evil. But after a moment, the warrior was surprised. In his hands, he was not holding a sword at all, but a thick goblin axe. Firkin the Strong could not understand how this weapon ended up in his possession. At this time, the Dark Lord sneered at him gloatingly. The evil lord asked the knight if this was really what the holy sword was supposed to be like, to which I received a negative answer. The warrior apologized for such nonsense and added that he had forgotten where he had put the real sword. Only then did I remember that it was in a magical pouch of pocket size, in which anything of different sizes could fit. He admitted that sometimes he puts it in the bag, forgetting about it. The Dark Lord thundered at the uninvited guest, saying, "What the hell is he spouting such nonsense?" Confident that this time he took out the right thing from the bag, the warrior swung his sword in the direction of his opponent with all his might. However, to his chagrin, the main character noticed that he had given up again. In his hand, he held the ancient staff of the Eternal Spirit. The warrior again begged to wait for him a little. Fumbling with his fingers for something sharper, Firkin the Strong quickly drew a sword from his magical pouch. But he was again unlucky. It was the legendary, bulky and majestic demon-fighting sword of the first people, mana level +9. Feeling ashamed that he was in such an awkward position, he continued his search. Drops of sweat began to fall down the knight's face. This time, Firkin the Strong found a weapon that caught his attention. He pulled out a nifty semi-automatic pistol from another universe. With a sneer, the Dark Lord asked if the warrior was sometimes a Doraemon, like the one he had just demonstrated with the invention from the future. Then, the owner said that he was tired of this uninteresting game. So he ordered our hero to attack with whatever weapons he had at hand. Stunned and confused, the knight could not understand why he could not find the lost sword. He took things out of the bag one by one, but could not find anything useful. Is this holy relic not there? Snarling angrily at the knight and raising his sword aloft, the Dark Lord ordered him to resume his attack. It doesn't seem to matter with which weapon it will happen. Confused by this situation, Firkin the Strong concluded dejectedly that he had lost the holy sword. Meanwhile, the battle was gaining momentum. The main character realized that he was in trouble. Then the events will take place 30 years after that. In the thick of the forest stands a tower, a secluded dungeon, forgotten citadel. A fight is going on inside the room. The Black Knight tightened his fingers on the hilt of his sword. The young man exhales. The battle was not easy for him. He sends a curse towards his opponent. The guard of the forgotten citadel, Zylok, calls the man an adventurer and emphasizes that the battle causes him terrible boredom. Here comes the time for a dynamic scene. A warrior in battle armor deals a powerful sword blow to his opponent. The expression on his face conveys anger and determination. The climax of the battle and the knight is already standing over the fallen opponent. Scattered fragments of the crown of the defeated lie on the side of the hill. A man in armor with a serious expression on his face looks at the fallen. Then he says to him that he was a worthy opponent. The defeated thanked for the kind words. His body burst into flames and the ashes scattered. The knight sheathed his sword. Standing over the ashes of a fallen enemy, the man gave his name as Johnson and said that he was an ordinary adventurer. The holy sword, which was passed down from generation to generation, has long since disappeared together with the last owner, the conqueror. Therefore, the man decided to look for the lost relic, going on a journey with his friends. During the search, the Trinity encountered many difficulties. There were many battles with different enemies. And finally, the knights found a dungeon that may contain a special magic blade. All three arrived at the citadel, which was scarier and more dangerous than they had imagined. Friends decided to separate. Suddenly, Johnson heard the order to stop. Out of surprise, he froze in place. Cursing, he turned at the sound of voices. He looked at the strangers warily. Two men stood and laughed at him. Our knight breathed a sigh of relief because he recognized his friends. The warrior was very happy that Mr. Mage and Mr. Archer were both alive and well. He was going to go in search of them. The knight asked if the friends encountered any particularly dangerous obstacles on their way, to which Mr. Luchnik replied that everything went without complications and they survived. Mr. Mage reported that they encountered a hidden boss, but it didn't give the expected results. His brother suggested that they had been directed in the wrong direction. Examining the map, Johnson said that he was hoping for information from it, since he had paid a lot of money to the Thieves' Guild. He thought that this time the Trinity would be successful in their quest for the Holy Sword. Mr. Luchnik outrageously asked how much was paid for the information, since the knight himself said that he was stranded and forced to eat only stewed grass. The warrior sheepishly replied that this adventure, like a small boat floating among the ocean waves, was bringing them closer to their goal, overcoming all difficulties. Their adventure is a true journey of pilgrims in search of the Holy Sword. Therefore, you should not be saddened by the loss of a few coins that were spent in the name of the legacy of the great conqueror. Outraged by his friend's behavior, Luchnik ordered Johnson to show his bag to see if he had any money. But Mage stopped his friend with a worried look in his eyes. He asked if everyone was feeling the same thing as him, namely the excess of mana that appeared in the air. Taking a fighting stance, the surprised trio began to quickly look around. Suddenly, Mr. Mage pointed to the door at the end of the corridor where the mana originated. The archer was filled with terror, and his skin seemed covered with ants. Johnson suggested that the battle will be tough and everyone should be on the alert. There was a sound. The doors opened, and the head of a ferocious monster appeared in the opening. Our knight ordered his friends to get ready. Mr. Luchnik whispered the prayer. Standing at the door of the room, the monster shouted with a terrible roar for the people to run away. Of course, no one was going to give up. Pointing his sword at his adversary, Johnson ordered him to shut his mouth and assured them that they would never escape. But in fact, the insurance company only wanted to warn about the danger that awaits them if the trio does not escape from here immediately. But just at that moment, the heavy sword hilt came down forcefully on his head. The arrow and sword were already aimed at the unknown killer who appeared before the searchers. Alarmed and surprised, the comrades tried to understand what was happening. Anxiety and questions reigned in the atmosphere. The fair-haired stranger wearily lowered his sword and bowed his head, saying that there is no... But he was interrupted by Johnson, who asked him if he was human or some other unclean thing, and ordered him to state his name. Paying no attention, the man continued to say, as if to himself, that the sacred sword was not here. Then, as if waking from a dream and opening his right eye, the stranger menacingly ordered to bring him a sword. Freezing, the trio looked at this terrible unknown. They were filled with fear and surprise at the words spoken. Horrified by what was happening, the mage assumed that the wrath of the holy sword might fall on the madman. The man probably fell victim to the curse of those who died at his hands during the search for the relic. He himself goes on endless journeys, killing everyone who comes across his path. In a frantic voice, the stranger spoke the word sword again. Comrades declared the man cursed by an evil spirit. The archer asked Johnson if he really thought that the huge flow of mana was coming from a madman. The magician guessed what the answer would be and suggested that everyone run away from here, otherwise they will be in trouble. However, our knight did not agree with such a decision, preferring to attack the enemy first. And he swung at his opponent because angry spirits, in his opinion, also die if you add effort to it. However, the attempt was unsuccessful. The man stopped the sword, grabbing the sharp blade with his hand. Then the old man delivered a powerful blow to Johnson's face, which sent the latter headlong down the hill. Seeing this, the archer confidently pulled the string of his bow, saying that he would definitely not miss. But a stranger approached him with lightning speed, deflecting arrows in his path with his sword. Mr. Luchnik was very surprised, because these were arrows that do not know misses. The eyes of the evil spirit radiated rage. He was standing opposite and swinging at his opponent, until suddenly his attention was distracted by a noise behind him. Taking advantage of this, the archer ordered the mage to use his charms immediately and kill the attacker. The sorcerer raised his staff and began a magical ritual. A bright flash filled the room with turquoise waves of mana. In the wizard's hands shone a bright sphere of magical energy, around which streams of light spread. His face was full of determination. He used short-range teleportation. Outraged by this behavior of his friend, the archer ordered the magus to stop and take him with him. But he replied that according to the pirate code, those who lag behind can be left in trouble. After all, it is natural that someone can save himself by running away. But while he was explaining to his friend and trying to move, the opponent kissed him between the eyes with the hilt of the sword. The mage lay unconscious on the floor. The archer looked fearfully at the stranger and wanted to ask him something, but he interrupted him and asked himself where the holy sword was. The warrior replied that he did not have this relic and immediately received a blow, from which he also found himself on the ground. The evil spirit stood for several minutes over the bodies of the defeated, kneading the tired hands. Then he turned and was about to leave, but our knight, who had just regained consciousness, spoke to him. The man said that from now on, everything became clear to him. First, the stranger has nothing to do with inanimate species. Secondly, this extraordinary flow of mana that makes its way to the wobblers. Third, his skills, which are beyond the limits of the skills of ordinary people. And the most important feature is his image with blonde hair and sky blue eyes. Among all his acquaintances, the knight has only one person who clearly fits the above criteria, and it was warrior Firkin the Strong. Johnson announced that he was his fan and quite seriously asked his idol for permission to sign an autograph. Bending his finger in such a way as to give the goldfinch a thumbs up, the glorious warrior replied that the conqueror had died 30 years ago. Our knight did not believe what he heard, but Firkin the Strong, ignoring him and continuing on, said that the knight had disappeared without a trace after a fierce and bloody battle. Reacting violently, Johnson rejected the words about the death of his idol, because he could not die with a sacred sword. He confidently declared that the same warrior was standing before him. The knight asked why the knight was freezing here in miserable rags and asked him to return because the world still hasn't forgotten. He remembered the sword that could be the final proof of his assumptions. The guy asked where he was now. It was at this moment that the patience of Firkin the Strong came to an end and he still sent his goldfinch to the address. The force of the blow was such that Johnson instantly fell face down on the stone floor and fainted. Looking him up and down, the conqueror said that the boy talked too much. For some reason, it always happens that people who don't know anything always make noise louder than others. He repeated once again that Voitel had died 30 years ago, leaving his goods to fend for himself and preferring to survive, like the last coward. In addition, he also lost the holy sword. Being an all-powerful warrior who allowed such a thing is an eternal shame. The legendary Firkin the Strong lived for 56 years, 30 of which he spent searching for the holy sword. An army of the dead in armor marches with spears against their enemy. They are preparing to attack. The sky was painted yellow-crimson from the fires burning around. The commander orders his subordinates to attack. The knights defend bravely, although the advantage is clearly on the side of the opponent. The leader orders not to retreat, but to give peace to the rebelling dead. With a powerful blow of the sword, the brave knight smashed the enemy's skull. Zombie complained about the excessive brutality of his opponent. The warrior invited his ally, named Bendal, to use AoE magic that could cause great destruction. It was a great chance to beat the enemy, but the wizard replied that he had run out of mana. Another comrade warned Arul to be on the alert as the enemies were on the offensive again. Celeric's back hurt a lot. The brave knight agreed with his order and added that it is worth teaching foreigners. Wanting to destroy the enemies, Arul furiously rushed at the dead, cutting them with his sword. Suddenly, his gaze stopped on something. He watched the magical phenomenon in amazement. An unexpected powerful magic wave flew in and knocked the defenders off their feet. Arul tried to resist the blow. Lowering his sword into the ground, he held onto it. A dark figure appeared before him. Bendel and Lyric approached our knight and asked him if everything was going to be all right. He answered them that the Lord of the Dead had arrived, the first of the Dark Lord's 4 commanders. The Lord, nicknamed the Ghost King, said with a sly smile that his name was. But at that moment, Arul rudely interrupted him, calling him simply No Way. The fire of rage lit up in the eyes of the king, but he wanted to commend himself once more. But the knight once again unceremoniously ordered his opponent to shut up, because he is not going to listen to such scoundrels. The angry king blew the helmet off the boy's head. The young man stood calmly, holding a weapon in both hands. He called himself Arul Ulfrin and added in a threatening tone that he would take care of the opponent personally. But Celeric stopped him, saying that it was no longer necessary. His gaze was directed deep into the crowd. The young man also looked around in confusion. It looked like someone had arrived just in time. The knights looked around curiously to get a better look at the warrior walking through the crowd. The formidable face of the warrior was gloomy but calm. He was looking at the enemy. It was warrior Firkin the Strong. The winner apologized for being late and asked why everyone was having fun without him. The opponent reacted accordingly to the humor and said that because of such fun, he was already starting to feel bored. Vityaz understood everything and promised to entertain the guest, at the same time calling him insultingly. The Ghost King named No Way. Of course, the Lord was indignant at this. He said since it's called No Way, it's logical that it causes some controversy. Firkin the Strong agreed that there was sense in such a judgment, so from now on he would simply be called the Named One and told him to be ready. Pulling his sword from the magical pouch containing the secret compartment, he warned the king that this was not a gift from Santa. The sword was enveloped in a bright magical glow. Firkin the Strong emphasized that this surprise would haunt the Lord of the Dead in his nightmares. With a haughty smile on his lips, the Named One asked what fearsome thing his opponent took out of the bag, and if it was a magic blade. The winner shook his head in denial and replied that he was holding a sacred sword in his hands. 2 travelers were sitting in a cart. The blonde man kept muttering the same phrase about the holy sword. His crazy eyes seemed to see nothing in front of him. This disturbed and frightened his companion quite a bit. The wheels screeched to a halt and the driver said that they had arrived at their destination. It was a fearful, accursed, dreadful valley into which one could enter, but from which one couldn't leave. Firkin the Strong remarked that the name was too long for one area, to which his companion reacted negatively. After all, this place is a den of ghosts, as indicated by the inscription on the signpost. Many hikers have gone missing after passing through the rocky crevice. In addition, it is said that the Ghost King himself lives there. Firkin Silny was somewhat surprised by this information. The travelling man decided to tell in more detail who this king is. He said that he was the Lord of the Dead and the first among the 12 Lichs. The Named brings terror, curses all living things and leads an army of ghosts. Firkin the Strong thought, So much time has passed, but it seems that his old acquaintance is still alive. A fellow traveler asked our main character why an old man like him needed to go to this valley. The warrior replied that he did not have anything special in mind. He had only come to check if there was a legendary sword here. The traveler's surprise was even greater when Firkin gave him his package. He opened it and saw inside the magical blade of the Forgotten Citadel, from which streams of incredibly powerful energy flowed in all directions. The man said he would give it away in lieu of payment, but warned the new owner to be careful with the gun, as it could drive him crazy. The cart moved on. The traveler waved his sword merrily. He was delighted with his new purchase. The winner himself thought. The story became more and more interesting. Before entering the cave, he looked up, certain that the legendary sword was right here. The enraged dead man rushed at the warrior with a shrill cry, wanting to kill him. Instead, he was instantly hit on the head with a stick. And although he was a ghost, he screamed loudly in pain. Firkin the Strong asked why he was clearing his throat so loudly, as if he had swallowed a bugle. The ghost replied that he had some difficulties with anger management. Dodging the next blow, he emphasized that the living are not allowed to enter here. Meanwhile, a crowd of dead people was already gathering around these two, shouting that this land belonged to them and that the man should go away. The winner ordered to close the pelka and bring him the legendary sword. However, the ghost didn't know what it was about, so he couldn't do it. He begged the man to stop and not mock the dead. But just then, one of his fellow men came out of the crowd, determined to attack Firkin. However, our main character deftly evaded this attempt and repaid the dead man. He smashed the offender's skull, noting that from now on he is completely free from the hustle and bustle of life and boundless light is already waiting for him. Amitabha. Using his ability to move quickly, the warrior smashed the heads of the dead one by one. The ghosts were shocked by what they saw because they thought that they could not be destroyed by physical harm. Swinging his stick again, Firkin the Strong announced that he would send everyone to meet the Buddha. Hearing this threat, the frightened crowd of dead people ran in different directions because none of them wanted to die. Looking at the fugitives, our hero ominously recognized that violence is the best way to communicate. Suddenly, he heard someone talking about him. Looking around, the warrior saw two creatures. The dead man pleaded with his master and asked him to establish justice. With a wicked smile on his lips, the overlord praised our hero for his agility and ordered him to state his name. In his mind, the conqueror noted that the Spirit King did not remember him at all, although this was not surprising since so many years had passed. So I decided to remind him. But our hero said out loud that he is not against having fun like in the old days while calling the opponent named. This mention of his name intrigued the king and he asked if they had met before. Then he took a closer look at his opponent and, remembering everything, called him Firkin the Strong. The warrior confirmed that it was him and asked if the Ghost King remembered him. Undoubtedly, he remembered him. Of course, named one could not forget his abuser who encroached on his dignity. With undisguised hatred, he repeated, "Conqueror Firkin the Strong." The warrior said that then the opponent who did the mischief only got what he deserved. For now, there is nothing to worry about because in front of him stands an old man. He also assured that he was no longer the conqueror, as he had given up his title of Firkin the Strong. Instead, the Spirit King mockingly remarked that he had never met a restless old man who would decide to loosen up a bit and attack ghosts. So the Lord of the Dead demanded to get to the bottom of it and tell him the reason for the guest's visit. He asked if he had come to kill him, to which Firkin replied that he had no intention of doing so. He came here because he heard that the legendary sword was located here. However, the opponent did not believe him and ordered to stop the cunning game. In turn, the warrior continued his story. He knows that the weapon that can cut through the heavens, turn the earth upside down, uproot mountains, and shake the very soul of this world is in the Ghost Valley. And he intends to test it himself. Therefore, he asked to bring him the legendary sword in a good way, and in case of refusal, he threatened to kill the opponent. The king acknowledged that the blade was here, but was not going to obey. After all, he is a lich, that is, one who has surpassed death itself. Looking directly into the eyes of the opponent, the Lord emphasized that such a warrior, and even more so such an old one, could not defeat him. Firkin did not react to these words and threatened to torture the king until he began to beg for his death. A sly smile appeared on the named one's face, and he asked the warrior if he possessed the greatest holy blade of all. Why did he need a new sword? With a grim expression on his face, our protagonist replied that he did not have a holy sword. The Lord of the Dead tirelessly continued his questioning, wondering if the warrior had actually once possessed the priceless relic. Firkin the Strong agreed, but added that he currently does not have one. Smirking wryly, the Ghost King decided to find out if the majestic warrior had really lost such a precious thing. He couldn't believe that the all-powerful conqueror could do such a stupid thing, because even the biggest fool in the world wouldn't dare to lose a priceless relic. The named one assumed that it was just a prank, but added in a serious tone that he was not so easily deceived. Unable to bear the empty hearts any longer, Firkin the Strong swung his staff at his opponent, but the Spirit King managed to evade. The battle has gained momentum. Our hero makes a new powerful blow. His movements are quick and precise. The opponent tries to dodge again, but the intensity of the attack forces him to retreat. However, seemingly oblivious to this, the Ghost King mockingly continues their dialogue. He said that in the absence of the holy sword, the warrior does not pose a threat to him. With a determined expression on his face, our main character hits the king's left shoulder hard with his stick. A powerful blow raises a cloud of dust. The named one is thrown several meters away from the opponent. The Ghostmaster said that from now on, the Firkin are no match for him, because they are in the land of the dead. And adding that in a place full of undead, no one will be able to defeat him, he summoned the Reaper of Death. Taking more blows, the Ghost King ordered him to take our warrior's soul. Grim Reaper obeyed the command and swung his deadly scythe with all his might. Suddenly, the blow was stopped halfway. The victor held the sharp blade of the weapon with one left hand. Shocked by this, the spirit froze from such a surprise, and the warrior offered him to join their dialogue with the king. Seeing the superiority of his ill-chosen victim over him, the Reaper decided to retreat and leave the Overlord alone with this problem. In a moment, when he already began to melt in the air, something completely incredible happened. Firkin the Strong broke off a good piece from his scythe and began to threaten the Spirit King with it. Moving to a safe distance, the Lord of the Dead called the warrior a mad beast. The warrior warned the opponent that he would count to 3, and during this time he must bring him the legendary sword. The named one decided that this time the warrior would not be able to get off easily and decided to use his charms against him, throwing a pile of sharp stones. But the attempt was in vain. Firkin the Strong barely moved from his place. At the same time, he dutifully extended the count to 2. The Lord of the Dead decided to submit to the inevitable failure and took out an amazing sword. And when on the count of 3 our main character swung a bite of the deadly scythe, the king threw the blade at the opponent's feet. Heaving a sigh of relief, the conqueror happily said that his efforts had finally yielded a positive result. Ghost and Reaper, who had been watching the confrontation all this time, discussed the consequences of the battle. For the king, who was the envy of all the dead, defeat was an absolute humiliation. The two were surprised by the Ghost Lord's mediocrity and inability to fight. The named one himself reflected on what had happened to Firkin the Strong over the years, because the warrior had become a real devil. Ignoring them, our protagonist wondered if it was indeed the same legendary blade. The Ghost King quickly assured him that it was the same glorious long sword. But the words did not really convince our warrior, so he once again asked whether the rumoured sword was really a long sword. And in a moment, the victor with a menacing expression restored his count to the number 3. The Spirit King fell to his knees and begged him to stop. He admitted that there had never really been a glorious blade here, and that the rumours about it were just a ruse to lure travellers. Things have been going badly lately, because outbreaks of plague and protracted wars have deprived them of fresh souls of adventurers. In the end, the warrior humbly agreed that the dead were only fighting for survival, so killing the Spirit King was pointless. The Lich was somewhat amused by such news. He asked our hero if he was going to harm him. Firkin the Strong emphasized that he could destroy the Lord of the Dead at any moment he wished, but still, the primary purpose of his visit was the Holy Sword. He also added that he would easily kill the named one, but since he would rise again, all the futile efforts would just take up precious time. Suddenly, a new idea occurred to the warrior. Thinking, he mumbled something about resurrection. Filled with joy at the righteous decision of the magnanimous hero, the Ghost King pointed the guest to the exit and wished him to leave his house as soon as possible. Ignoring his host's gestures, Firkin snapped out of his reverie and placed his powerful hand on the Lord of the Dead's shoulder. He asked if the Named One could bring the dead back to life. At the same time, it should not be a thoughtless ghost wandering in the darkness of the subconscious, but a real, full-fledged resurrection. The Lord of the Dead was unfeignedly offended. Is he being taken for a divine dragon who knows how to perform such miracles? But he immediately thought about it. He thought about placing the soul in another body because this is the essence of lichs. Comforted by this idea, our main character said why he himself did not think of such a decision. After capturing the Ghost King, Firkin the Strong fiercely ordered a lich to be created for him. The two walked through the forest. One of them was a knight in armor. The other looked like a hermit in a black cloak. Suddenly, armed men jumped out of hiding and surrounded the travelers. They were robbers. The knight shouted with a laugh for them to get away, but at the same moment, a swift arrow pierced his head. The man screamed out of such surprise and fell to the ground. His companion looked at him in silence. Meanwhile, the robbers demanded that the victim give everything he had, and otherwise threatened to kill him as well as his friend. Suddenly, a rapid flow of magical energy erupted around the deceased, which surprised the robbers. The knight's body gradually began to rise from the ground. With a hint of irony in his voice, he said that he couldn't believe that someone had decided to attack him and his friend. In a mocking tone, the former deceased apologized for not being able to offer anything to the rascals. The horrified thugs stood stunned. Some screamed because they were frightened that the corpse had begun to speak, while others watched with delight. One of the bandits, probably the leader, ordered his subordinates to come to their senses because the rebel was in front of them. His colleagues, thinking that they had stumbled upon a drinker, offered to just kill him. The leader crept up from behind so that the hooded person would not notice him and struck a blow with his sword. The blade shattered into pieces. Frozen with fear, he listened as the hermit began to tell a parable. Once this man argued with the sun which of them would be the first to undress the robbers. The sun heated their clothes so that their bodies were burned to the bone. But in fact, it wanted to remove not the clothes, but the disguise from this rotten world. After all, in order to burn and cleanse all evil, it is necessary to remove the armor from those who live in it. Unspeakable horror filled the robbers. The hermit cried out that it was necessary to burn and throw away the bodies of the wicked, as this was their only salvation and opportunity to atone for their sins. A huge ball of fire erupted over the forest. The gang leader fainted from the shock he received. Terribly frightened robbers desperately tried to escape, running in different directions into the forest. They were convinced that they had met a demon that was sending a curse after them. Firkin the Strong took off his hood and told his companion that the rabies were definitely stuffed in their pants from fright. Still not taking out his arrows, the man in armor was indignant that his companion had resorted to magic for the sake of a slobberhead. However, the conqueror told him not to worry because the huge orb was empty. And our soldier added that his companion also has certain talents because he was able to survive after a direct hit to the head. With a sense of pride, the Spirit King, taking off his helmet, said that there was nothing strange about it because he was a lich. After that, the accomplices took off the clothes of the gang leader, who was lying unconscious on the ground. The Lord of the Dead muttered indignantly that he was now a rogue and angrily claimed that he was a high-ranking person but was humiliatingly forced to hide it. Firkin asked if the Spirit King would prefer to tell everyone that he was a lich. Our hero said that before, until a certain incident, he loved the church. Therefore, I wanted to find a way to understand everything. The Phantom King assured that he wasn't afraid of the church. But Voitel added that it was about Bendel, and he didn't care at all whether the Named One overcame the church or not. However, the main character reminded his companion that for the time being, while the agreement between them is valid, the Lord of the Dead must remain unharmed. With great reluctance, the Ghost Lord agreed, but asked the warrior if he was really going to create a new lich. The victor confirmed this and added that he needed to make Bendel a lich and bring him back to life so that he would become the key to the Holy Sword. The implementation of this idea seems quite easy. The Ghost King was outraged. After all, if we are talking about a thoughtless ghost, then everything is simple. Every dead person is doomed to oblivion so as not to remember pain and suffering and find peace. This blessing is also a curse. The Lord of the Dead asked Firkin if he really wanted to break the established order, bringing trouble on himself just to satisfy his interests. The warrior stood lost in thought. The king continued and asked if he really wanted to resurrect his best friend as a creature cursed by the whole world. Voitel replied that he did not care about all this. His only goal is to return the holy sword. The companion noted the courage of his friend. Our main character continued to convince that nothing is important. They weren't so good with Bendel, and eventually he would figure it out. And he needs a former friend only because he was once the keeper of the sword, and therefore he will definitely be able to tell its whereabouts. To implement his plan, the warrior asks the named one for help, after which he promises to let the Spirit King go and never meet him again. Just in case, the Lich decided to specify what would happen if he refused to help. A mighty fist was Firkin the Strong's terse reply, so the named one decided to immediately make a deal with the warrior, and they both shook hands. Pulling out his spellbook, the Lord of the Dead noted that the body for a newly created Lich, no matter how powerful the undead, must be carefully prepared. Firkin asked what it would take. The Lord of the Dead opened the records on the corresponding page and listed 1. The heart of the dead, because it is the basis of the sacrifice. 2. The soul-searching eye, and more. But he was interrupted by the victor, not wanting to listen to the full list, and simply ordered to be taken to the right places. He himself will become the leader. 2 travelers stopped in the middle of the forest. Leech reported that they had reached their destination. Tall, powerful trees stood around the travelers. This ancient forest is called Elven Garden. Turning to his companion, Firkin the Strong asked if this was where the essence of the forest was. The Lord of the Dead explained that the resurrection of the dead required a payment, that is a sacrifice. If you need to bring back an ordinary person, then either a pig or a dog will come in handy. But the one they were going to bring back from the world of the dead was a great wizard, and Voitel agreed with this. However, he was interested in why it was necessary to carry out the plan here, because his old friend lives in this place. The forest giant walked along the path with a heavy gait. His eyes burned. His menacing growl filled the air with fear. But he was not alone here. Armed men were already lurking around the bear in their ambushes. Some waited for the order with sword in hand. Others prepared their arrows sitting high in the trees. The hidden warriors watched as the giant fearsome passed through their possessions. The 2 knights whispered to each other. One of them said that the bear is not an ordinary animal. It is the guardian of the forest. A man with a helmet on his head said that today their army was ordered to calm down the beast. Then his brother shouted that he was attacking an animal and jumped out of the bushes. The first one did not have time to stop him. With a cry of "Glory to His Majesty the Emperor," the warrior struck the bear with his sword. In a moment, infinitely surprised, he held a part of the blade, which broke into several fragments. The enraged beast turned to look at his offender, who had already begun to pray out of fear. With a powerful paw, the forest guard struck the frightened man, and he fell to the ground, breathless. The angry bear roared furiously, opening his mouth wide and showing his sharp teeth. Several visible scars on his chest indicated his combat experience. The commander of the soldiers realized that from now on there was no other way out, so he ordered everyone to prepare their swords. Suddenly, a man approached him and asked him to stop, because victims can be avoided. He wanted to deal with the aggressive beast himself. The fighters talked in surprise. One of them asked if the stranger was a mercenary. Another interlocutor replied that he had only heard about him before, but now he would be happy to see his power. And Wizard Adol had incredible power. A courageous man was warming up his hands before a duel. The tension was growing. The Great Bear came forward, anticipating a quick fight. The fighters discussed how the atmosphere of tension and danger had changed. They were overcome with delight at the appearance of the wizard. Unexpectedly for them, Adol beckoned the beast to him, inviting him to strike first. The military watched this gesture with amazement. They were shocked by the magician's self-confidence. The enraged bear rushed at the enemy. The fighters had no idea what the wizard was up to if he deliberately angered this beast. The magician kept his fists at the ready, and at this time, the bear had already swung at him with his mighty heavy paw. Adol dodged the attack and in turn delivered a powerful blow to the opponent's liver. The confused and shocked warriors opened their mouths wide in surprise, because the thickness of the bear's skin is about 10 centimeters and it will not be possible to defeat the beast so easily. The fierce battle continued, and none of the opponents conceded their strength and dexterity to harm the other. Nevertheless, Adol gradually gained the upper hand, and this caused a new wave of admiration among observers. Everyone was amazed at the mage's ability to fight with his bare hands without using charms. Firkin the Strong told his companion that they were in the territory of forest dwellers, so they needed to be extra careful. The Lord of the Dead suggested that they might be attacked with arrows, but the Conqueror informed them that this was not the worst thing, as the Lord of the Woods had to be wary of them, so they had to move as quietly as possible. With a sneer, the Lich noted that Firkin himself is famous as a model of bad temper and a person who destroys everything in a row. Suddenly, our main character moved to the side and saw a large clearing with a bunch of stumps, these remains of majestic trees. The Phantom King wondered who could have done such a thing, and the warrior suspected that it was the work of human hands. The travelers did not have time to look at everything properly when they heard the sound of hooves. A small army approached them. Firkin knew that the guardians of the forest and the humans were at war, but he had no way of assuming that the army had gained the upper hand in this confrontation. The Kavaran commander, who rode up on horseback, ordered our comrades to raise their hands and, without resisting, say their names. The victor, stopping the indignant king, informed that they were only travelers. Then he asked the leader how the human army got to the land of the forest guardians. The military said that His Majesty the Emperor Humanin ordered to push back the forest dwellers and reclaim the ancestral territory. And the forest itself was at the epicenter of the liberation mission. After that, the Havaran demanded to leave the area of hostilities immediately, which greatly angered the Lord of the Dead. He wanted to make amends immediately for the disrespectful behavior of the military man towards him. However, Firkin the Strong stopped the emotional king early and told the warrior that they would be turning back. But when they had already moved a few meters, one of the soldiers stopped them, wanting to check the identity of the named one, because he looked like a wanted criminal. The Lich immediately wanted to kill the man, but the Conqueror only ordered him to shut the door. Our hero reflected on the fact that the Emperor had invaded the lands of the Forest Guardians after all, and this event annoyed him quite a bit. Suddenly, the soldiers saw the bear lying on the grass. The commander drove closer to take a good look at everything. Adol, shaking off the dust from his hands after a recent battle, announced that the mission was accomplished. The soldier asked if he had really defeated the mighty beast, but then he remembered that he had heard that this sorcerer had defeated the ogre with his bare hands. Adol boastfully replied that performing any task as if by waving a magic wand was the essence of a magician. Firkin the Strong crouched next to the bear and was glad to see that he was still alive, though unconscious. He noted the considerable power of the sorcerer. However, here our hero was noticed by the military and pointed sharp spears to his face. The man was reminded that he had to get out of here, as he was ordered, but he violated this requirement. Therefore, according to the current martial law, the traveller must be executed immediately, and he has the right to the last word. But instead of a dying speech, Firkin the Strong suddenly yelled for everyone to lie down on the ground. Enemy arrows flew at people with lightning speed. An ambush was arranged by the forest guards. Their leader, a dark-haired elf, ordered her subordinates not to leave anyone alive. She said that anyone who enters the territory of the forest will remain here forever as fertilizer for the trees. Obeying the order, the elven archers rapidly released their arrows at the enemies. In order to protect themselves from shots, wizards began to form a protective sphere dome. As the commander of the human army was wounded in the shoulder, his soldiers were very worried about this situation. Still, they tried to hold the protective barrier. The commander admitted that he had lost his vigilance. He couldn't possibly think that the elves had been lying in wait all this time. The military commander also added that if the situation does not change, the army will simply be ground to dust. Therefore, ordering to keep the formation, he went to call for help. Bewildered subordinates shouted after him. Dodging clever arrows, our main character noticed this moment and cursed in the direction of the sergeant. The named one, whose body was already riddled with enemy arrows, complained that Firkin the Strong was not giving him permission to kill everyone. Instead, Voitel told his accomplice to better dodge the arrows. And he also pointed out to the King of Spirits a young man who quite skillfully repels them or simply grabs them with his hands. The Lord of the Dead wondered why the boy was so skilled. Our hero thoughtfully said that this soldier reminded him of himself at a young age. Suddenly, the warrior raised his hands and said that he surrendered because he was an ordinary mercenary. But the elf said that it is not possible to simply give up, because the one who has incurred the wrath of the forest will only be punished by death. Examining her, the ghost lord asked if the swarthy girl was sometimes a dark elf, and then she was doing in this place. The elf was outraged by this remark and ordered her subordinates to destroy the xenophobe. The victor, who moved closer to the girl, intervened in the dialogue and offered to stop there. Seeing the surprise on her face, he asked if she remembered him, because when she was little, he played with her and rode on her back. This remark completely threw the elf off balance, who took the old man's words as a mockery of herself. She headlong fired arrows from the bow in the direction of the daredevil. But Firkin the Strong, fighting them off with one hand, invited the girl to stop and listen to him calmly. Cursing and ordering silence, the indignant brunette did not abandon her goal of destroying the enemy. She reported that the humans had broken the non-aggression pact and invaded elven lands. Enemy forces are brutally destroying the guardians of the forest, so their anger will never fade. Seeing that it was impossible to come to an agreement with the girl, Firkin the Strong quickly approached the bear. He placed his hand on it and began to heal the beast, commanding it to return to its true self. The spell worked, and in a moment the druid Sagom was lying unconscious on the grass. The elf got very angry and pointed her bow in the direction of our main character. Calling Firkin a freak, she demanded not to touch the bear. At first, Voitel laughed loudly at her reaction, but then, grabbing the druid by the throat, offered to sit at the negotiation table. Suddenly, there was an explosion, and the flames engulfed him and the captive. Smugly Yavka announced that she would not participate in negotiations with the enemies. Scowling at such a prank, the conqueror said grimly that the elves had almost killed Sagom. The elf was shocked because she released the most powerful arrows of mana at the enemy. However, the unsuccessful result deeply affected her. Our hero suggested that the Ghost King teach the ill-mannered forest dwellers, stressing that he should not kill anyone. The girl, not wanting to listen to her enemy anymore, ordered everyone to shoot at the same time. The dark figure of the Ghost Lord in the middle of a large purple sphere, surrounded by lightning bolts of powerful magical power, protected the trio from being hit by arrows. The Spirit King revived the recently fallen soldiers and ordered them to join the Elven Etiquette class. Next, events develop at the outpost of the human army. A wounded commander runs into the general's tent. The commander asked him what had happened and whether the soldiers had fallen into a trap. The warrior humbly bowed and answered that, at the time of questioning the suspects, their army was surrounded. The general specified exactly which people were in question. The commander replied that they had caught an old man and a strange hooded bandit who had invaded their land and were about to execute them, but their army was attacked. The military commander said that he understood everything, but he himself thought about the description of the captured people. Sir Orn, who belonged to the king's army, the First Order of Knights, entered the tent in snow-white armor. The wounded commander was interested in what this warrior from the elite troops who only carry out royal orders needed here. And then the vice-captain turned to him, asking if the one he had just been talking about had blonde curls, blue eyes, and a scar on his face. The commander confirmed the assumption and added that the old man had most likely already died at the hands of the elves. However, the elite fighter denied this hypothesis because the one he was looking for had to destroy the forest dwellers himself. The general wondered if the old man really had so much power and who he was if the Knight Order itself was looking for him. However, Sir Orn ignored the question and, thanking him for the help, turned to leave the tent. He ordered the commander to take him to the place where he had last seen the old man, Temple of the Guardians of the Forest. 4 figures stand around a large magical bowl that emits a bright green light. This is the leek of the Udun tree. Priests perform a magical ritual. They call upon the High Elder, whose head is adorned with horns, to see the danger that looms over the forest. He said he saw the elf he was looking for. He allegedly hid in the kitchen. But other members of the assembly informed him that this was not the correct information. Then 2 bound elves appeared in the murky water of the bowl. It was Commander Gom and Darnam who were captured. One of the priests said that an ordinary person from the Steel Empire could not do this. Clenching the staff tightly in his hand, the Lord of the Forest said that Firkin the Strong had finally appeared. Soldiers killed by elven arrows lay on the meadow of the forest. The two men looked around. The commander mournfully noted that after the battle, none of his subordinates seemed to have managed to survive. Meanwhile, Sir Orn picked up a handful of earth and touched it with his tongue. It was a proven way to find out information about a battle. He said out loud that he felt dirt, and therefore, during the confrontation, dark magic was activated here. The earth has been ravaged by black mana that pollutes the entire environment. Shocked by this news, the commander asked if the hermit was a dark wizard. However, Sir Orn answered him in the negative and added that he was actually a great hero. The military man was amazed. Really, that worthless grandfather could be a hero. The knight told him that one who is truly skilled at his craft usually rarely worries about his appearance. And since the sorcerer was the owner of the sacred sword, there is no need to doubt his skill. Suddenly, the commander had a guess that the old man was a warrior. Sir Orn realized his mistake. He had told too much. Taking out his sword, the knight quickly cut the soldier's throat with it. Being a noble man, he apologized to him because he could not leave a witness to the revealed secret and thanked him for showing him the right path. Sir Orn then added that the commander came back alive alone, and he deeply despises and hates such people. On the way, the knight reflected on the fact that the Ghost King and the Conqueror were now together. It was strange. Sir Orn considered himself a fan of Firkin the Strong since childhood, but now feels contempt for him. The cart in which the prisoners were shone with a magical light. The elf, feeling very humiliated, demanded to be killed. The question of honor was of primary importance to her. Therefore, Darnam suggested that the sorceress remove the protective barrier and fight her. Firkin was quite annoyed by her cry. He asked the King of Spirits if there was any spell that could be used to stop a man's mouth, as his memory had deteriorated over the years. The Wraith Lord mockingly remarked that the Conqueror was too mild-mannered for leaving the captives alive. Therefore, the share of justice in it has not yet faded. Against the background of the girl's hysteria, our hero explained that he could not do otherwise, because this brunette is the daughter of his local friend. He thinks of her as a niece, and she used to be quite a sweet child. The king agreed that it was not appropriate to kill his friend's child in such a case. And Firkin the Strong added that despite this circumstance, he was going to use the captives to obtain the essence of the forest. This spirit is a true source of mysteries, and its power is so great that it has been guarded since ancient times. Thinking about this, our hero was indignant that the elves didn't use her in the fight against the Dark Lord. He concluded that he would blackmail the captives to death in exchange for the essence of the forest. In his opinion, it was the perfect plan. The named person, not without sarcasm, noted the shameful behavior of the glorious warrior. The elf tried to intervene in their conversation, but she was not given the opportunity to speak. Adel intervened in the conversation and asked why he was captured then, because he is not an elf. Firkin mentally noted that the young man suffered for nothing. He should be released, but the spell cannot be removed, so the young wizard will have to wait until the end of the negotiations. Darnam interrupted his thoughts, saying that the warrior was cruelly mistaken. There was no way the Lord of the Forest would give him the essence that was the foundation of their lands and a divine inheritance. Foreigners have no right to even talk about her. However, Firkin the Strong informed the girl that he did not know enough about all this, but ordered the captives to pray that his plan would come true. If he fails, he will destroy the entire forest and still steal the essence. The brunette received his words with deep fury. The elf screamed that the old wizard was pretty worthless and was only able to grab her because he was caught off guard. Gom, who had just regained consciousness, intervened in their conversation. He told Darnam that before her was no ordinary old man, but the conqueror of Firkin the Strong himself. The elf protested fiercely. In her opinion, it was impossible that the old tramp turned out to be the same glorious warrior. Our main character happily greeted the bear. Gom once again confirmed his previous words to the girl. This beggar is the warrior who disappeared with the holy sword 30 years ago. Here, in the memory of the elf, came memories of how, when she was small, she had fun playing with Firkin the Strong. Bowing on his knees, the bear greeted the majestic hero. Of course, he couldn't forget his brother in arms, even with the drastic changes in his appearance. The winner said that such a greeting makes him too much of an honor. The named sarcastically noted that they are trying to deceive. The elf came to Gom with a request not to bow to the old man. Ignoring her, he asked why the hero had visited them after so many years. And in general, where was he all this time? After all, when the warrior disappeared, a new disaster befell the world. As the Dark Lord continued to pose a threat, former allies in the fight against him turned their weapons against each other. An example of this is Lord of the Iron Empire, who used to be twinned with the forest dwellers. Currently, he is destroying the ancient forest. Everyone can hear how the souls of the slain druids scream. Gom indignantly pointed out to the conqueror that even then he could have prevented it. But now, he simply had to stop the bloody war. In a calm tone, Firkin said that he refused to do so. Surprised and outraged, the bear demanded an explanation. Our hero said that his goal is only the essence of the forest. He also expressed regret about the situation, but couldn't help. The druid reminded the sorcerer that he was the legendary conqueror. However, these words did not make an impression on the warrior. He gave up this title a long time ago. About himself, our main character thought that he should intervene when something unpleasant happens. However, he has some unresolved issues with the human king. Darnam defiantly called the warrior a piece of trash, suggesting that he was the one who created the protective barrier. Firkin the Strong decided to finish the Teravani and continue the movement, threatening to shut up everyone's pelts for the noise. But after a few steps, Voitel suddenly stopped. He listened. The named asked him what happened. At that very moment, as if by a strong gust of wind, the Ghost King was thrown some distance away. The warrior successfully deflected the attack. It was a giant tree root. Firkin dodged another attack, moving quickly from one place to another. Once he was near the Lord of the Dead, he asked if the protective barrier was in order. Unfortunately, the answer was negative. The cage was broken and its prisoners were missing. Then our main character ordered the men to catch up with the fugitives, who could not run far. For himself, the winner noted that he had not seen his old friend for too long. The majestic, muscular figure of the forest elder stood on a massive tree branch. His confidence and posture indicated undeniable authority and incredible strength. He held a staff in his hands. The elf looked down and menacingly at our travelers. Firkin the Strong noticed that his friend had come in vain, because everyone was going to visit him anyway. Having folded his hands in a welcoming gesture with a joyful expression on his face, Voitel invited his friend to make up for what he had lost. Huge root tentacles dug through the soil and tried to grab the Ghost King. He fought back with all his might. Defending himself against these tentacles, the victor ordered to leave them, and without wasting time to catch the fugitives. He agreed to leave this place. After catching up, the warrior warned the Lich not to think of escaping himself. Otherwise, he would seek the Spirit King instead of the Holy Sword. Turning before making the move, the Lord of the Dead turned and promised to return for the hero's soul, asking him not to die until then. For a moment, our main character thought about it. He had a low level of trust in this matter. From now on, the fighters were left alone. Firkin the Strong offered Udur a little teasing. The high priest descended to the ground and stood before him with a serious expression on his face. The elder remembered all the names of the warrior: Slayer of Dragons, one who carries light, insolent old man. Our main character was somewhat offended and asked not to give out strange nicknames anymore. Udur continued to mock. He said that now he does not recognize his acquaintance, who has become even uglier since he got older. His unkempt beard and tattered clothes give him a terrible look. Apparently, he became the strongest among the homeless and hungry. The warrior was even more indignant. Kneading his muscles, he reminded his friend that they had not seen each other for 30 years and he was greeting him so rudely. Then, Udur informed him that he had some news that had happened during that time. The first news was that he was no longer an ordinary elder, but the great master of this forest. With a sincere smile, Firkin the Strong congratulated his friend on such a significant event as promotion. Such behavior greatly infuriated the elf. He tried to strike the warrior with a staff, but he managed to dodge. Continuing his attack, the elder ordered to choose his words and to address him with respect, as he was 100 years older than his opponent. Every time they meet a warrior, the priest feels that the Confucian dragon is trembling inside him. Firkin mockingly noted that the old man's speech gave him the impression of a man from the last millennium. Suddenly, the arms and legs of our hero were entwined with powerful tentacles. The winner did not expect such treachery from the Lord of the Forest. Udur seized the moment and delivered a powerful blow to the bound man with his magic staff. Firkin was thrown several meters and he was on the ground unconscious. The elder, giving the next command to the giant tentacles, accused our hero of the fact that after how many years he came to them and attacked the guardians of the forest, and also brought the dirty dark mage. The roots rushed towards the victor. Meanwhile, Udur emphasized that the warrior crossed the permissible limit with his actions. Firkin complained that the blow was painful. Firmly grasping the thick tentacle, he assured his opponent that he was wrong, because the first ones to attack him were the forest guardians. The warrior raised the rhizome and hit the Lord of the Forest with force, who barely managed to stay on his feet. Delivering a new blow with his fist, our hero told his friend that both in the past and now he does not change his habits, remaining so annoying. Full of determination and tension, the elder's face looked intently at his opponent. Udur asked the warrior if he had appeared at the time for the duel and if he was not on the side of the human king. Pressing hard on the staff with which his opponent resisted, Firkin the Strong denied his involvement in someone else's dispute. He came for the essence of the forest. Stunned by this news, the Supreme Elder stood back, pondering what he had just heard. He weakened his defenses, so the Conqueror took this opportunity to push him. Our hero added that he needed exactly the cadaver of the giant tree, as the locals call it, or the Udun leek, which has been so diligently guarded by the Guardians for many centuries. He also clarified that he wants to use it and return it quickly. It is only necessary to borrow the essence of the forest for a short time. The elder said that in Firkin's old age, Firkin the Strong must have lost his mind if he came up with such nonsense. Seeing that things were not going well, Voitel pointed the staff at its owner and, threatening him, suggested that his friend share the goodness. Also, looking at his opponent with a piercing look, he emphasized that he wanted to deal with everything without too much trouble. The elder agreed, but specified that he would share not the holy relic, but the warrior himself, and directed a powerful force of energy at the giant rhizome tentacles. Firkin admitted that he had expected such a development and dashed up the stem with a burst of heat. Furious at this situation, Udur asked why the warrior needed the essence of the forest. After all, it is known that the elder cannot give this thing to anyone. At this time, a huge magical sphere of powerful energy formed in his hands. Our hero replied that he was going to resurrect someone who had been their friend and helper years ago and had died at the hands of the Firkin. The winner asked Udur if he understood who he was talking about, but the amazed Lord of the Forest did not answer anything. He was so stunned that he lost control of the spell he used to control the rhizome. Leaving his avatar, Udur pondered what Firkin the Strong was up to. The warrior stood over a pile of debris. He realized that in front of him was only the so-called root clone, and not his elf friend. The warrior pondered whether he had done the right thing. It seemed to him that he had bent the stick. Also, our hero did not know what to do with the consequences that would follow after resurrecting a friend and turning him into a lich. After all, a warrior needs to find a holy sword. In a moment, Firkin the Strong remembered that the Ghost King was supposed to capture the fugitives. He wondered if he had any problems with this task. It was at this time that the Lord of the Dead, chained in handcuffs, walked grimly accompanied by elven warriors. He couldn't overcome the magic that was placed on the bracelets, and he hated the people of the forest for it. The strong man approached the place where the trap was located, which was hidden with the help of tree roots so that it would not be seen. He considered a magic circle that had the effect of inversely limiting the release of mana. The more mana used inside the circle, the more is released outside, imposing certain limitations. So it will be difficult to use it. Then the warrior stopped in front of a barricade of steel wire that was strung from tree to tree. The wire was well lubricated with a nerve agent, the crown method of the forest guardians. The toxin was so poisonous that a single scratch was enough for even a giant to fall. Firkin the Strong noticed the bandit mask the lich was wearing. He was greatly annoyed that the famous Lord of the Dead would take up something so primitively pathetic. With bitterness in his heart, he called the king Count, because he did not deserve a higher title. As things turned out this way, Firkin had no choice but to charge into battle himself. With sadness in his eyes, he looked into the distance where the House of the Elves was and complained about his old age. After resting for a moment, the warrior cheerfully ran forward. all this time, sitting on a tree, he was watched by a figure in light armor. Looking after the runner, Nidorn exclaimed happily that he had finally found Sir Conqueror. Further events develop in the Temple of the Guardians of the Forest, the majestic tree Udun. Podcarina Underground Prison. The guard shoved the Ghost King into the cell, sarcastically inviting him to make himself as comfortable as possible. Walking down the corridor, the guard muttered something about vile dark mages, to which the prisoner vehemently denied that he was the Lord of the Dead. But suddenly, from a nearby cell, the continuation of the list of his titles was heard. Ghost King, named 1, first star among the 12 liches, sevenfold reborn. Examining the newcomer, the young man said that, in his opinion, he should have had a grander appearance. Lich asked who this young man was. In response, the boy said that his name is Adol, and he knows about the King of the Dead from his teacher. The named mentioned that it was a mercenary who was accidentally captured, and now he is again in captivity. The Ghost King wondered who the mentor was, perhaps some academic or a dark mage. The boy replied that he had little information about his teacher, who had many secrets. But he knows one thing for sure, that he used to be a lich. The named was surprised because he had never heard of any of the 12 training a human, let alone a simple warrior, not a dark mage. Adol confirmed that he was a wizard, but the Ghost King did not believe his words. The young man emphasized that he was not deceiving. It's just that the Lord of Ghosts is probably not familiar with his mentor, the 13th Lich. The Master of the Dead denied this because after 12, a new one did not appear. So he thought that the boy had made it all up. Adol said that he doesn't care if people believe him or not. He will be able to prove everything only when they get out of here. Therefore, he offered to join forces and escape. And there are things he wants to know. The king liked the tempting offer, but he pointed to the handcuffs and explained that the more mana used, the more mana was released in the opposite direction. At the same time, the shackles are compressed more strongly. Perfect protection against magicians. The trap is so insidious that even he himself will not be able to cope with it. Straining his muscles, Adol tried to break the chains. The named mockingly remarked that although he had seen the young man's abilities in hand-to-hand combat, he could not do it by brute force. But it was at this moment that one of the links broke with a crack and the sorcerer separated his hands. Stunned by this, the Lich wondered if the young man had really used his physical strength, because he could not use mana because of the handcuffs, but he spoke of himself as a mage. The boy asked if the Lord of the Dead agreed with this form of answer. However, it is too early to act, as his plan is to wait for the right moment, destroy the bracelets and escape. This idea pleased the Spirit King, but he informed the young man that he himself had a certain plan, otherwise he would not be in prison now. The Lich wants to know how the Conqueror's plan is implemented because he, destroying everything, will certainly appear here. And until this happened, he ordered the boy not to waste his energy. Adol had doubts about what was said. Suddenly, small stones fell from the ceiling. Guards ran down the corridor shouting that they were under attack. A lecherous grin appeared on the Lord of the Dead's face as his predictions began to come true. Instead, Adol looked at him in disbelief. The guards of the forest discussed the alarming event. No one could believe that human waste had made it all the way here. But it was not an army, but only one person. An old scoundrel was destroying the walls of the castle. Menacingly ordering the administrator of this haunt to be summoned to him, Firkin the Strong delivered several powerful blows to the stone structure. Stunned, the defenders watched as the Conqueror passed through the opening where only a few moments before had stood the solid wall of the defensive wall. The guards were on the alert, but our protagonist said, reassuring them that he just came for negotiations, and unfortunately, no one opened the door for him. The Lord of the Forest emerged from the crowd. He ordered Firkin the Strong to stop, calling him stubborn. Among the crowd, Gom and Darnum could be seen watching the conversation intently with serious faces. Voitel noted that everyone gathered together. He also expressed hope that this time it was not a clone. Then the warrior offered to resolve their misunderstanding and come to an agreement at once. However, Udur did not listen to him and immediately delivered a powerful blow to the head of Firkin with his staff. The winner did not dodge, but withstood this attack. A stream of red blood flowed from his temple. The Master of the Forest could not explain to himself the behavior of his former comrade. Our hero asked if the Elven family had a tradition of beating him every time he wanted to talk to them. He added that it wouldn't hurt for them to be a little more polite with their guests. Filled with rage, the elder snapped that he had nothing to talk about with the warrior who had not only brought the Ghost King, but had also begun wreaking havoc and destruction on the lands of the forest. Udur bitterly noted that in front of him was already the conqueror he had known before. Our hero wiped streams of red drops from his temple. Placing a hand on the elf's shoulder, Firkin the Strong invited him to speak again in a calm but confident tone. He also emphasized that he really needs the essence of the forest just like the Dark Mage. In response to these words, the High Priest shouted that there was no way he could allow this to happen. But our main character said that he already knew his opinion, but assumed that everyone has something more precious than their own life. He added that nothing could be more important than the precious guardians of the forest. Gom and Darnam, hearing this, were shocked and greatly indignant. The girl demanded to kill the scoundrel. The angry elder raised his majestic staff above his head with determination. The blue and white flashes of energy spoke of the powerful force of magic that the forest master had brought against his enemy. The rivals engaged in a duel, but suddenly their attention was drawn by the defenders of the temple, who on both sides of them began to faint. Udur asked what trick Firkin the Strong had invented this time, but Firkin the Strong replied that he had no part in it. A dark figure with a sword appeared in the cloud of dust, who spoke, though he was sorry to interrupt the sweet conversation, but he had business to do with Sir Conqueror. It was Orn. He held his mighty sword discreetly, and his expression was quite calm. Firkin the Strong just shrugged. He had no idea why he had come to him. He asked the knight if he had appeared alone. A sly smile appeared on Sir Orn's face, and he announced that he could not show such disrespect to a majestic hero, so he invited his companions on the journey. The Lord of the Forest looked grimly at the First Night Order and decided that the human king had finally decided to end the war. However, even in this tense moment, Firkin the Strong did not betray his intentions, and once again asked to give him the essence of the forest. Udur reacted rather viciously. However, our main character ignored the reaction of the elf and offered him to make a deal. In exchange for the necessary thing, he would end these people. 2 people were playing chess in the tent. The general won again, and his opponent expressed approval of his perseverance. At that, the fair-haired man immediately complained that there was no way he could win the game, because the opponent must have acquired special talents during the confrontation with the elves. The warlord smiled openly. Taking a glass from the tray, he said that it might be so. And the war, which has been going on for the 3rd year in a row, should end soon. The general's guest asked if the First Order of Knights had really joined this battle, to which he replied that they had come here because they had a special assignment. Bringing the glass to his mouth, the soldier clarified that in any case, the cause of the order would be useful in carrying out His Majesty's will. The end of the war. The man asked why the general was enjoying the coolness and not going with the army to help the knights. One Eye replied, as you know, the First Order of Knights is subordinate to the Emperor, and so its ranks include the best masters of swords and magic, each of whom is superior in strength to more than 1,000 warriors. Despite the guest's retort that he knew what it was about, the general continued to tell. The knights are quite secretive and little is known about them except for their snow-white armor. So the general decided to just rest and wait for the masters to do their work. He was sure that the end of the war was now only a matter of time and depended entirely on the knights of the First Order. Gom turned into a stocky bear again and attacked one of the uninvited guests. But his paw hit the opponent's solid shield and he roared in hellish pain. Darnam suggested that the bear strike together and destroy the enemy. The girl released her destructive arrows. With a light movement of his right hand, one of the magicians instantly created a magical protective barrier. The elf looked grimly at her opponents. It annoyed her that the attacks did not have the proper results. She was nervous. The intensity of the battle grew. The guards of the forest watched as the sorcerer raised a pile of stones with a powerful energy flow before their eyes, which flew in different directions. The owner of the forest could not stand aside. He ordered his subordinates to die, and he himself called for help from the Udun tree. Everyone knows that it is difficult to overcome. The elder commanded the fearsome giant. A girl knight came out against him. As she prepared her sword for a swift attack, she raised a vortex of magical energy. Orn came closer to our main character and noted with a happy expression that the resistance proved to be strong. He then invited Firkin the Strong to join the battle. The warrior looked around. He regretted that he had not resolved his case before this situation began. Then our warrior asked the knight why he was so kind to him. Firkin added that he did not know how he knew about him because he was seeing him for the first time. The intruder apologized for not introducing himself earlier and introduced himself as Orn, Deputy Commander of the First Knight Order. He received an order from the Emperor himself, so he went in search of the conqueror to escort to His Majesty. The warrior asked what kind of escort he was talking about, because, in the past, he was a guide of light. The warrior ordered Hamanin to be handed over to let go of the past and give him peace. Firkin the Strong said that he was itching to strike his opponent, but he was holding back because his negotiations with the elf were not yet over. Hearing these words, the master of the forest cursed hotly and asked if he would remain an outside observer after being a famous victor. But our hero insisted again and asked for the essence. This was quite unexpected for Sir Orn. Therefore, the knight swung his sword with all his might. Then he said that he wanted to fight properly because he met his idol. In turn, Firkin confidently evaded the attack. Meanwhile, the vice-captain demanded from him to show all his talent. He longed to see the majestic power of the glorious hero. After receiving several wounds, the victor asked where he got such a beautiful sword. The force with which Firkin the Strong grasped his hand overwhelmed the knight. But he agreed to satisfy his curiosity. Resisting the powerful onslaught, Sir Orn announced that he would only tell the story of the sword if the warrior defeated it. Gathering his strength, the knight swung his sword wildly. Our main character defended himself, but the wave carried him several meters and he thought that he was facing a difficult opponent. Orn gloats that he hasn't shown his full potential yet. Accumulating a charge of magical energy, the knight confidently raised both hands, clutching the swords. Surrounded by a purple glow of mana, he ordered to get ready. Powerful, bright spell lines cut through the space. The vice-captain gleefully announced that it would hurt. Firkin the Strong barely contained the powerful flow of magic. His hands burned from the burns. The knight approached our hero and said that children's games are over, and from now on, everything will be grown up. The winner jumped away from the vice-captain to gather his strength. The hands, damaged by the heat, hurt unbearably. He looked menacingly at his opponent, trying to predict his next move. Sir Orn laughed loudly, his enemy's murderous aura making a pleasant impression on him. He suggested to his adversary not to delay his pleasure and to finish their business quickly. Suddenly, the master of the forest leaned his back against the back of our protagonist. He had just repelled another attack by uninvited guests. Firkin the Strong noticed that he was completely exhausted. Udur was forced to admit, not without regret, that each of these knights of the First Order was a true monster. In addition, they are all equally equal to each other, and each of them is not inferior to the other in strength and endurance. The High Elder then added that the girl who fought him reminded him of a young Firkin. These conversations reminded them of the past times when they had fought enemies back-to-back as well. The warrior will point out that he has changed and will never be able to return to the past. However, common sense still remained with him. Rivals surrounded them and asked how long they would be playing. The knights wanted to finish the work they had started as soon as possible. Firkin the Strong turned to his friend and said that he really wanted to beat the enemy. Udur accepted his inevitable defeat and said that he would give the essence to the forest so the warrior could safely go to fight. The vice-captain laughed mockingly at their conversation. However, at the same moment, the conqueror delivered a powerful blow with his powerful hand. The knight tried to resist, but the advantage was clearly on the side of our main character. Firkin warned the enemy that if he continued to find himself, he would eventually just break. Next, a small excursion into the past. The captain of the First Order of Knights, Commandos, in a conversation with a subordinate, admitted that he had heard rumors about the whereabouts of the warrior. Sir Orn confirmed that he had received information from a farmer who had a magical sword mysteriously found. The one who had given him the blade was a fair-haired man who had entered the Lord of the Dead's lair and had also come out alive and unharmed. The captain asked if this information could be trusted. His interlocutor replied that they missed him last time in the Forgotten Citadel, but for now there is no doubt. In addition, Sir Orn knows that our main character is heading to the Elven Forest. The warlord said with relief that at last they had come upon the track of the victor. The only strange thing was that the farmer had a magic blade with him, and he wondered what that could mean. But the knight could not find an explanation for this. He asked why he was called to the office. The captain replied that he wanted to give him some advice. Since Firkin the Strong is on a completely different level than those Orn has fought before, he shouldn't go it alone. The subordinate thanked for the sound advice. He had no reason to worry, adding defiantly, since the famous hero was probably quite old and infirm by now, there shouldn't be any problems. The captain praised Sir Orn's bravery, but emphasized that his vanity was poisoning him. The warlord saw Firkin the Strong fight with his own eyes. He said that the warrior is called the Victor, not because he wields a holy sword, but because our hero is damn strong. Tension and concentration prevailed in a frantic duel. The vice-captain resisted with 2 swords, but his knees were already shaking from the powerful collision. Sir Orn shouted and viciously asked his opponent if he sometimes mocked him, and at that very moment he received a heavy blow on the head, which caused him to crouch on the ground. The knight was surprised by the power contained in the warrior's empty hand. Orn underestimated the opponent, thinking of him as a useless old man. Firkin did not stop his attack, and his enemy began to complain about another beating because the warrior promised to strike only 1 blow, to which our hero replied that it would be somehow ignoble on his part. Unexpectedly for himself, Voitel saw before his eyes a sharp point of a sword. A girl in white armor came to help her friend. The vice-captain shouted at her not to interfere because he wanted to deal with the famous hero himself. During the confrontation, the fighters had time to have a verbal dispute. Therefore, Firkin the Strong advised the opponents to stick together, but the knight asked him not to tear the kirpa. Instead, our hero said that he was not boastful. He just wanted to warn his opponents so that they would have hope for salvation. Sir Orn did not stop demanding from the warrior that he treated the battle with all seriousness and showed his abilities in all their glory. In turn, the winner cut off that they don't like excessively wealthy people. Firkin the Strong tried to grab the hilt of the sword. However, his opponent overtook him. Sir Orn maneuvered and drew his weapon and struck hard. Bright red blood flowed from the wound, but this did not stop our main character. Moving behind the enemy and delivering the next blow, the knight insultingly called the victor a rudiment and urged him to disappear. However, in a moment, the vice-captain was standing and staring in a daze at his empty palm. Firkin. The Strong stopped the attack, calmly grasping the blade of Sir Orn's sword with his bare hand. Our hero gloomily noted that he does not consider himself a relic of the past, and the opponent showed gross rudeness. He also added that Sir Orn would have to restart his training from the beginning, since he does not know how to properly handle paired blades. Sweat dripped from the knight's forehead. He could not believe that he saw with his own eyes how the warrior stopped his blow. Firkin the Strong, examining the sword, said that it was pretty good, but the same couldn't be said of the weapon's owner. He then asked if everyone in the First Order had the same swords. The warrior continued to think further. If you look at the amount of passive mana in the accelerated forging steel, it can be said that many swords of quite high quality have been invested in it. So the human king is still trying to create a new holy blade. But Sir Orn did not allow him to finish his monologue and decided to continue his attack again. The mage activated the second blade. Our main character quite calmly and skillfully stopped the blow with the blade he was just looking at. After that, looking back at his opponent, he asked if he was sure that he could defeat him in a sword fight. Suddenly, a few hairs fell from the head of Firkin the Strong. A girl in armor pointed, standing on either side of our protagonist. The winner called out to her with undisguised anger. Why did she intervene in a men's duel? But, at that moment, a new battle of words began. The Lord of the Forest pointedly remarked to Firkin what he was going to do with the hole in the wall that had appeared during his fight, to which the warrior sarcastically replied that he had more important things to do at the moment. As for the wall, he gave advice to build a new one, because this one could not withstand even a blow with bare hands. Sir Orn wondered why the conqueror remained so calm, as if his enemy posed no threat to him. This behavior of the opponent annoyed the knight very much. Calming down his rage, he made a difficult decision. He ordered his comrades to retreat. Our hero wondered if they were running away without finishing the job. To this, the knight calmly said that he quickly gives up ineffective ways. Then he added with a smile that it was the first time since his captain that he had faced such a high bar. For Firkin the Strong, it was a great honor. But here, he recalled that he did not allow his opponents to leave the battlefield. Smiling at these words and waving his hand in farewell, Sir Orn announced that they had prepared a mass teleportation spell in advance, and in addition, the locals were in for an interesting surprise. This surprise turned out to be one terrible shot, which at that very moment, standing on the edge of the precipice, was fired by an archer of the First Order. Firkin had thought that the uninvited guests were just biding their time to take advantage of the break. However, raising his head, he saw an arrow approaching him with lightning speed. Pointing his sword against her in defense, he struggled to stop the powerful attack. He had just thought that it was quite heavy, when at that moment, a veritable shower of fiery arrows came down on him. The warrior complained that only one shot had been promised. In turn, the knight repeated the words of the majestic hero, that being alone is somehow ignoble. Finally, the vice-captain wished to meet next time and teleported. The opponent's movement saved the bear from another strong blow, and he breathed a sigh of relief. Catching her breath, Dynam also noted that everyone was gone. She asked uncertainly if the elves had rubbed their noses. The knight moved to the platform on which stood the archer, who launched fiery arrows. The latter turned to Vice-Captain Orn, saying that he could not assume his defeat. The knight angrily replied that it was as if he had discovered another sky above the sky and felt like a miserable frog. Everything looked as if Firkin the Strong could not be pierced even with an arrow. The archer replied that the warrior was a real man, but he still left a few scratches on him. But Sir Orn scoffed and noted that he had to beat with all his might. The knight reflected that even if he had put all his trump cards into action, he still would not have won the victory, much less, even if each of them together had done the same thing. The vice-captain concluded that it was a complete defeat, and the mission of the First Order of Knights to escort the conqueror to the Emperor had failed. So everyone needs to get back to base immediately. Firkin the Strong stood in the middle of a desolate, cracked battlefield with great gashes in the ground that formed fiery arrows and fallen trees. The warrior carefully looked into the distance to see if another shower of fire was flying from the sky. Udur approached him and asked if everything was okay, to which our warrior replied that these few scratches would only embellish his image. And then he reminded me of their agreement. The owner of the forest strictly said that he would keep his word. However, he demanded an explanation. Firkin the Strong is obliged to tell why he needed the essence of the forest. The events take place in the basement of a place no one knows about. The dialogue is conducted by two men. One of them asked if he really wanted to create a lich. In response, the cloaked figure asked the young Firkin to speak more quietly, or someone might hear them. The second man objected. He was not going to do anything like that, he just wanted to do research out of his own curiosity. The winner snickered because it means the same thing to Bendel, and he's too curious. Never stops halfway. The warrior also added that it was probably for this reason that the sorcerer eventually created the holy sword. In turn, the magician agreed that this was exactly how it was. He said that no matter what it was called, it was a real magical blade that immortalized the body and spirit of its owner. Bendel asked the warrior if he felt his blade dominating him. Firkin the Strong replied that it was for this reason that he only used it when absolutely necessary and usually carried it in a magic pouch. The sorcerer emphasized that the sword will always have an influence, and eventually it will completely possess its owner. The warrior lightly replied that he was a great warrior, and therefore no blade could take possession of either his body or his spirit. Bendel warned the man that due to the oversaturation of mana, his body would begin to release a magical force that could cause the body to not withstand such an onslaught and burst from the inside. Otherwise, you can lose your mind and start behaving like a prisoner of the Dark Lord. Instead, if the essence of the lich is applied, there is a possibility that physical defects can be overcome. Firkin asked if that meant being a lich was good. The mage said that muscles, blood, nerves, everything in lichs is controlled by magic. That is why no wounds are fatal for them. If this pattern is applied to a warrior, physical damage from spells can be avoided. The winner excitedly exclaimed that this was an incredible discovery and asked how Bendel knew about it. And he told him that he had been conducting some scalpel experiments on the Ghost King. Firkin the Strong remembered that he had been ordered to bring him alive. The sorcerer confirmed that he needed living material for research. Our hero asked his interlocutor why he is still in this image, because they are now alone. Somewhat embarrassed, the wizard replied that he was used to hiding his identity from other people. Because of this, it became unusual for him to see his face. Still, Bendel made the transformation. The events take place near the udon tree. Elves are patching holes in the wall after a recent battle. The Supreme Elder and his subordinates sit at a round table and negotiate with Firkin the Strong. Udur asked if the warrior really dared to resurrect Bendel. The warrior confirmed it. The owner of the forest continued the questioning. Is it really planned to turn the dead man into a lich? After an affirmative answer, the two interlocutors laughed loudly. Others present watched them carefully. Enraged, Darnam jumped up and asked her father why he was listening to this nonsense. She continued indignantly that the uninvited guest was not talking about the destruction of lichs, but about their creation. And as a sacrifice, he intends to use the essence of the forest. This cannot be allowed at all. However, the high priest stopped her and reminded her that he had made a deal, so he could not break his word. The elf tried to deny something, but her father did not give her the opportunity to speak. He then asked Firkin for what reason he wanted to resurrect Bendel, since 30 years had passed. The elder continued his reasoning. The wizard died while fighting the demon king and now rests in the Blackland. So why destroy his peace and condemn him to the curse of eternal life, since they were partners? The warrior did not want anyone to interfere in his personal relationships. He said let each side give what it must give and take what it must take. However, the Lord of the Forest objected. He absolutely needed to know what Firkin was up to. Is it all for the sake of the Holy Sword? Our main character looked at him with resentment and sadness in his eyes, but remained silent. There was whispering at the table. Someone heard that the Holy Sword was lost. Others replied that one would have to be quite a fool to lose the relic. The Supreme Elder continued. He hoped that he was wrong, but the reaction of our hero, unfortunately, spoke of the opposite. Udur had heard that a warrior was searching for a lost sacred sword. However, the elf could by no means think that the conqueror was going to come to such a conclusion, as if he had still not gotten rid of his idea of fixation. Our hero frowned. He was forced to admit that he was indeed looking for a holy blade. Neither in the nest of the Grey Mountain Dragon, nor in the garden of the King of Elves, nor in the underground tomb of the first man on earth, he was nowhere to be found. For 30 years, Firkin the Strong has been everywhere possible, but he has never managed to find even the slightest clue. Enraged by the mention of the search, he stood up and slammed his fist hard on the table, causing it to crumble to pieces. The warrior did not understand how this was possible. The owner of the forest, continuing to listen to the interlocutor, sadly thought that the table was quite expensive. The only goal left to Firkin the Strong is that he had to find this blade for which he was willing to do anything. At these words, Udur exclaims in exasperation that the warrior is out of his mind and just obsessed with his sword. Threatening, the victor grabbed his sword and said that as long as he was in his right mind, he advised him to keep his promise. The elder hastily assured him that he would definitely fulfill his part of the deal, if only he would put down his sword immediately. The owner of the forest invited the warrior to follow him. He left the room, indicating the direction. Meanwhile, in the prison cell, the warden of the forest removed the shackles from the Spirit King, who gleefully reported that everything was going according to his plan. Gom walked up to Adol and looked sternly into the eyes of his rival, who had recently defeated him in a duel. The bear said that the Lord of the Dead had been released by a deal with the warrior, but that this did not apply to the other prisoner. To this, the named one slyly remarked that he could not be let go, because the sorcerer could go out himself. In confirmation of these words, Adol destroyed the bars of the cell and went out into the corridor. Shocked by his action, the elf asked where his handcuffs were. The prisoner replied that he had left them in the cell. The Ghost King said with delight that it was amazing. However, the forest warden refused to allow Adol to leave the premises, insisting that he was their prisoner. Releasing his mana, the Lord of the Dead disagreed with them and said that he intended to take the boy with him. The two former prisoners left together. Gom still tried to stop them. He became madly angry and, transforming, prepared for a fight with a lich. But the Spirit King stopped him early, saying that he was just joking. Then an idea occurred to the named one. The Lord of the Dead crouched on the floor and began to cast a spell. He said he wanted to give a nice present. However, the angry bear was going to stop him so that he would not do anything. Adol stopped the guardian forest as he himself was interested in what the lich was up to. Soon, the Ghost King announced that it's not every day you see such magic. Walking through the dark corridors, Firkin the Strong frankly admitted that he did not know that such a vast space was hidden inside the tree. Udur replied that it was all to protect the essence of the forest from prying eyes like our warriors. He was indignant and said that compared to the others, he was an example of a gentleman. The high priest announced that they had arrived. The soldier was amazed because he had seen something like this for the first time. In front of them were the remains of the first man on earth, the wooden giant. Firkin the Strong asked if the core was really inside him. The Supreme Elder commented that he considered this quite likely. Our main character did not like these words, and he looked at the master of the forest in surprise. A deep pit was dug in the middle of the forest. The soldiers tried to quickly bury their fallen comrades in a mass grave. The priest led the funeral mass. He appealed to the great patron of light, Al, to save the souls of these young creatures, showing care and mercy. The two who were carrying the fallen warrior complained to each other about the priest. One of them said that, unlike workers, the life of monks is easy. Another was indignant. Why those prayers, as if thanks to them, the dead can come to life? Suddenly, this is exactly what happened. The man, who was being carried by the soldiers, regained consciousness and tried to stand up. The priest shouted joyfully that finally a miracle had happened and the patron Saint Al had answered their prayers. The resurrected dead began to rise from the mass grave. Panatek decided to help the warrior, who was tormented by thirst and therefore constantly asked for water. He offered his hand to the man. However, the former dead man grabbed him and, biting his neck, began to greedily drink blood. Panic began among the living. The revenants began to surround the military, who were shouting and hollering for help. Annoyed by the noise, the general tried to sleep, but a dead man had already run to his tent and tried to bite him. Screams could be heard from outside. Someone shouted that even more dead were coming from the western side. The general, coming out of his tent, asked where the commander had gone. Cursing, he said that he was not in charge of an army, but of a military base. Looking around, he wondered where his army had gone. The camp was engulfed in flames. The general assessed the situation. He did not understand where the special forces could have disappeared. Suddenly, the Death Reaper stood before him. But the general reacted quite calmly and seriously asked why outsiders were here. The implacable judge declared that everything happens according to the will of the Lord of the Dead. Ignoring his words, the general said to himself, "Since there is no one around, he will have to decide everything himself." Taking off the occluder, he said that he is completely underestimated. After all, it is not for nothing that the post of commander of the Western Front does not go to just anyone. His eye emitted a bright yellow mana light. The Lord of the Dead shouted, "Voila!" as he was completing his magic. A general's head appeared on the prison floor. Stunned by what they saw, Adol and the guardian of the forest began shouting at once where this head had come from. Gom said that, although this sight is not a pleasant one, it still creates an impression of magic. The named made a small clarification that the head did not just appear, but actually moved here because it was cut off from the commander of the enemy army. Then the lich asked the bear if he recognized the face. The shocked guard was in disbelief. The Spirit King continued to say that the general's right eye possessed magic, which is why he wore a prosthesis. Still too surprised, Gom decided to check this information. He took the head and began to examine it carefully. The guard confirmed that with the magical prosthesis, he definitely couldn't be an ordinary soldier, so he had to admit that the head belonged to the general. When asked how it was possible to do this, the lich told with a proud smile that it was all thanks to the combination of 3 spells of the highest category of white magic and 1 of black magic. The Lord of the Dead added, "Where there is a dead man, everything is under his control. In whatever place it happens, one corpse forms another." So, for the collective people, the Ghost King is a big disaster. Gom thought about the fact that this lich was actually a very scary creature. The Supreme Elder has been unable to end the war for 3 years now, but the Lord of the Dead did it with such ease. The bear frowned. It turned out that everything was in vain. The war and its victims were just entertainment for the Ghost King. The Lich interrupted his thoughts and asked if he had paid enough for Adol's freedom. The keeper of the forest agreed, as he believed that everything was done with little blood and the inhabitants of the forest remained in the advantage. Suddenly, footsteps were heard. Firkin the Strong asked what payment for Will meant and what the Phantom Lord was doing here. Then he looked at those present with a stern expression. The Lich was indignant at another nickname from the warrior. The warrior explained that one would have to be a complete moron to allow such a weak creature to hold one's hand. So he demoted the king to a lord. Disregarding the explanation, the named one asked if the contract had been fulfilled since the warrior had appeared here, as well as where the essence of the forest was currently located. The victor replied that she was with him, but the Lord of the Dead did not believe him and asked to show him. The frightened trio stared in surprise at the huge creature that appeared behind our main character. Pointing a finger at the crowd, Firkin the Strong calmly said for everyone to meet the essence of the forest. The soldier excitedly asked what allegedly meant. Udur leaned closer and whispered orders to calm down and listen to him first. First, he explained what exactly the essence of the forest is because it was created from the dead body of the wooden giant Udun. In the past, when the giant died, his body was divided into many parts and scattered around the world. This is how the essence of the forest was created, and the Guardians passed it down and guarded it from generation to generation. Our hero scornfully said that he didn't need a history lecture, and he didn't care if it was the body or the brain or other parts. The most important thing for him is the essence of the forest itself. However, the elder said that he told about an important point because it is quite necessary for knowing the truth. In the end, he decided to simplify the story and called the warrior to come to the bowl. Udur emphasized that the elves are only guardians, so they themselves do not know what the essence of the forest looks like. In the past, many tried to capture and use it for their own ends, but in the end, no one was able to obtain the giant. Firkin was indignant and said it was quackery. The Supreme Elder reminded that he had already warned about this. He cannot give the spirit of the forest to anyone, and the reason for this is that he himself does not know how to do it. Then the elf ordered the warrior to bend over the cup as close to the source as possible, and the warrior almost dipped his face into the water. Our hero warned his friend if he wants to say that the core of the forest is in his heart, then, but the warrior did not have time to finish. It was at this moment that Udur kicked Firkin the Strong with all his might, and he fell into the well. The High Elder said that water knows the answers to all questions, but Firkin must remember that everything depends only on him. The enraged conqueror cursed and was about to repay his ally for this act when he suddenly froze, because he was in a completely different place. The surprised warrior began to look around. He could not understand where he was and in what dimension. The weather was clear. The lawn was pleasing to the eye. After walking a few steps, our protagonist noticed an interesting white tree. Suddenly, it disappeared and then reappeared. The winner did not watch this phenomenon for a long time. After all, a giant of incredible size suddenly appeared before his eyes. Firkin the Strong nervously complimented him on his beautiful eyes. Our hero had a guess that this is the same wooden giant Udun, and the world around him was created in another dimension. Instead, he didn't even hear the shouts because Firkin was too small and was mistaken for a mosquito. The creature wanted to flatten the insect, but suddenly felt a strong resistance. The giant could not understand what had happened, and was quite surprised. For a moment, the giant thought he had made a mistake, and in fact almost crushed the horned beetle. Firkin barely had enough strength to resist. He strained his muscles so much that blood trickled down his nose. While removing his hand, he noticed a small man and was very surprised because there were no people here before. The warrior was relieved. With a stunned expression on his face, he looked back at the giant who had shrunk somewhat in size. Approaching the warrior, the giant calmly said that there had been a small misunderstanding. Our protagonist half-heartedly asked what the ambiguity could be if he was almost killed. Shrinking his size, Veled denied that no one had the right to die in this place without his consent. Then he invited our warrior to look at his body, the wounds on which had miraculously healed completely. Firkin looked at his hands in surprise. However, the next minute, the winner said in disbelief that if someone else had been in place of the big man, he would have immediately turned him into a chop. The giant thought, because even a truly ordinary person could not resist his power. Who is this then? The warrior cautiously noted that the giant was instantly behind him, and he did not even notice this moment. Firkin replied to the stranger that he was a warrior, just an old man passing by. While our main character was speaking, at that moment, two majestic thrones appeared from the ground right in the middle of the clearing. The giant took that to be the man's name and said that he was pleased to meet the warrior, just an old man passing by, and added belatedly that he welcomed him into his world. At first, Voitel wanted to correct the host and give his name, but in the end, he decided that it was not worth doing and left it as it was. Firkin the Strong reported that he knows who his interlocutor is. He is one of the first people on Earth, a man who was created by the Creator and whom everyone calls Divine Being. Sitting on the throne, the mighty Vele calmly and attentively listened to his unexpected guest. Our hero sat down on the chair offered by the sincere owner and sadly thought that if he had known that he would appear before the majestic being, he would have at least changed his clothes. The giant remembered that ordinary mortals called him a divine being. But in reality, she had long since died, and he was nothing but her likeness, which had been created with the help of memories. That is, the giant himself is not a divine being, so it is not necessary to honor him. Our hero quickly took advantage of the opportunity and, immediately switching to you, asked to give him the essence of the forest. But he could not do it. Our main character impatiently asked what the reason was. The giant replied that he could not do this because he didn't know what the essence of the forest was. Our hero was annoyed by this statement and shouted that this cannot be. And if the giant himself does not know, then who should know? Wanting to explain everything to him, the warrior himself wondered what it was. Vital energy or something similar. Or it was a huge force, similar to the power of a giant. Cheers asked if the essence of the forest meant great power. The warrior agreed to leave that a guess. But even under this condition, the giant could not give him what he wanted because he did not have such strength. Then Firkin the Strong slammed his palm down on the ground, showing by this example how recently the giant had almost crushed him in the same way. The great man thought, he is a being who has no strength and at the same time has unlimited power. He can transform into anyone or anything and can exist anywhere and everywhere. A giant can destroy everything and create anything at the same time. But at the same time, he repeated that he is only a likeness, and this incredible power is not his, so he can only use it here. It is for this reason that it is simply impossible to transfer this power to someone else. Firkin considered what he had heard. Disappointed, he asked if the giant could give him at least something so that he would not leave empty-handed. Quite unexpectedly, the big man offered him a deer. Our warrior did not even know where it came from. Then the giant asked if there was anything else the warrior wanted to tell him. The winner thought, is that all? Perhaps this is precisely why no one has yet managed to take possession of the soul of the forest. However, Firkin the Strong thought that this was not at all what he had imagined. And since he does not know what the essence looks like, he had no answer as to what to do next. He came here for nothing. The giant turned to him. If the warrior had nothing to say to him, then the creature would send the warrior, just an old man passing by, to his world. Due to the fact that the warrior could not think of anything else, our hero asked if he could at least take the deer. Zdravelo calmly replied that since he cannot give the desired strength, the deer will give it. But at the same time, he noted that it is also only an image of an animal. Suddenly, Firkin the Strong realized that the deer was the giant. The warrior decreed that from now on, he would be the essence of the forest. The giant was intrigued by the idea that he was the image of Udun. But the warrior specified that he considered him the actual soul of the forest, and not just a likeness. He asked if the image could really come out of here. Then the warrior offered to go with him, calling him the face of the divine creation. The giant admitted that many people had visited this place, but this curious mortal was the first one who wanted to take him and not something else. So he agreed to go with him without hesitation. The Lord of the Dead concluded that the essence of the forest was not just a powerful force as he had previously thought. Excitedly examining the man from all sides, he called him the soul of God, the image of the soul of the divine creation. Instead, Giant became interested in the Phantom Lord, whom he called a creature that broke the curse and became immortal. The high priest was watching them from his loggia. Gom approached him and said that the winner had gone somewhere. The Lord of the Forest assumed that he had gone to hunker down before leaving, as Udo had ordered our hero to be shaved and changed. With sadness, the bear noted that everything was in vain, because they had been trying to win this war for so many years, but everything suddenly ended in one day. The strangest thing about it is that the elves were saved by the warrior who destroyed their wall, and the dark sorcerer whom everyone hates. However, the Supreme Elder denied that the war was over. He said that this was only a temporary respite, and when the enemy rearmed and attacked, the people of the forest would not be able to defend themselves. Gom emotionally declared that no one will be a fool because you can immediately form an army and call for help from another forest. However, Udur snapped that all these efforts were in vain. He said that the residents should leave the forest. The shocked bear protested, but the priest stopped him. He explained that the elves guarded the forest to protect the essence and all the guardians at the same time. However, during the 3 years of the Bloody War, an innumerable number of their relatives and friends died. Therefore, the Supreme Elder could not allow the repetition of this tragedy. He emphasized that since the forest essence had left the temple on its own at the moment, there was nothing they could do at the moment. Gom accepted the high priest's decision and announced that he would join him. Udur ordered a gathering of all the elders to determine their future together. Feeling his face, Firkin the Strong noted that a short beard did not suit him. He approached the trio and, looking at those with whom he would have to go on a journey, listed Essence, 1 piece, Corpse, 1 piece, some unknown warrior, 1 piece. Groomed and in new clothes, Voitel shone like a new coin. He turned to the men and offered to go to the next destination. Suddenly, Darnam appeared and said that the Supreme Elder had ordered to hand over the clothes for the fellow warrior. Then she reluctantly conveyed the thanks from her father because thanks to our main character, all the inhabitants of the forest can leave this place in peace. The girl added that she wanted to become stronger so that she would never turn to the winner for help. Someday in the future, she will definitely thank Voitel. Firkin turned and left. Saying that he couldn't stand such scenes, he looked around and told her that if the elf really wanted to pay him back, she should try to do it as soon as possible. The warrior added that he would look forward to it, while Darnam stood and watched the men silently. 2 enemy armies were preparing for a clash. The orcs were frantic with the anticipation of a deadly encounter. Gog the Angry rushed into battle, but the leader stopped him and ordered him to wait. The orcs were surprised because they came here for the sake of war with humans. The leader of the Stone and Shield tribe, Grog the Brave, spoke majestically that this war was between the chiefs and he wanted to know which of the people was his rival. The signalman sounded the bugle command and all the knights knelt down. Homan Ingenuan walked through the crowd. Addressing his enemy, His Majesty announced that he was the opponent that the leader wanted to see. The orc viciously challenged the human king to fight. And since Grog declared himself generous, he gave the right of first strike to the Lord of the Iron Empire. The knight handed His Majesty a spear and he, not rejecting such an opportunity, hurled his lifeline in the direction of his opponents. The weapon did its job in a flash, and in a short moment there was already 1 killed enemy lying on the battlefield. The frightened leader called Gog the Angry for help, but no one knew or saw where he had gone. Grog the Brave then decided to fight himself, but with one swing of his sword, Inganuan cut off his head. Wiping the blood from the blade, the King of Men declared that the commander-in-chief of the enemy army had lost and ordered his army to kill everyone else. Soon, a messenger brought the report of Captain Commandos to the Emperor, according to which the general commanding the Western Front had died. The report also reported that an army of 5,000 soldiers had been defeated. The reason for this was the attack of the dead. The king ordered 10,000 warriors to be placed under the command of Eggstiré to destroy the elven forest. But suddenly, he read the name Firkin. The messenger explained that Sir Orn, who had been pursuing the conqueror, had sent word that he had met him in this forest. Unfortunately, the attempt to bring the warrior here failed. The emperor was interested in the fact that Sir Orn was defeated, and 30 years had passed for Firkin the Strong for a reason. After that, His Majesty menacingly ordered Duchan Farven to come to him. He noted in his mind that he would finally be able to meet the winner. Suddenly, Gog the Angry appeared on the dragon, wanting to avenge the death of the leader. The king instantly drew his sword and killed them both. As he continued his thoughts, he remembered the magic pouch he hoped to find in Firkin. Walking through the forest, the Phantom Lord asked the conqueror what happened to the pouch. He replied that he gave it to a friend. The surprised Master of Spirits could not believe how such a precious thing could be given away, but the warrior clarified that the bag was a personal one, so he asked his friend to hide it so that he himself would not lose it. Adol asked what was in that bag and why the Emperor was looking for Firkin the Strong, to which he replied that there is nothing special about her. Our hero began to list King of Devils, Arel Olfrin. Shocked by this, the companion stopped. Stunned, Adol asked if Firkin the Strong had really imprisoned the Devil King, as the world believed that the illustrious warrior should have killed him. The Phantom Lord noted an interesting piece of information. Voitel congratulated his comrades on the fact that they are one of the few who know the true state of affairs. He also added that this decision was made in the highest circles to establish peace in the whole world. Then our hero hinted that he didn't want to take the boy with him, and he also constantly asks questions. The young man said that he is the sorcerer Adol and travels around the world to find a teacher who disappeared a long time ago. He thought that with the travelers, he would be able to find at least some clue that would lead him to the mentor. So, the magician asked permission to join them on this journey. The winner denied that he did not have time to look for a teacher there, so the young man had better return home. The boy cheerfully called out the name of his mentor. Halvar Brighton was a wizard who everyone called the Great Sage, and our main character had to know him. After all, he was the teacher of Firkin the Strong himself. The warrior stopped for a moment. He turned around and said that the old man had died a long time ago. But Adol denied that the magician died and did not die at the same time. The Lord intervened in their conversation and said that, according to the young man, the teacher became the 13th Lich. But this may not be true. Otherwise, it would be quite interesting that the former Great Sage became a Lich. The Lord of the Dead then hinted that the boy might be useful to them in their search for the Holy Sword or the resurrection of Firkin's friend, the Strong. Our hero declared the old sorcerer a liar. Smiling, the Spirit King noted that only a conqueror could call a Great Sage that. The glorious warrior irritably reminded them that they would follow the defined plan, focusing on the resurrection of their friend. Then he added that no one knew for sure if they would be able to meet old Halvar Brighton, so he agreed that Adol should go with them. But the boy will interfere. Leech noted that it was nice of him. Firkin the Strong asked the king about the plan for the next course of action, because they had taken possession of the essence of the forest and were almost out of elven territory. The Named reminded that the giant is only a sacrifice to be made to a dead soul. Pointing to his crystal on his forehead, the Lord said that they then needed to find the heart that would restore the body of the dead. The Vampire Lord held a friend in his hand. It was the heart of the earth which had inexhaustible magical power. The Bloodsucker felt incredible power and thought that he could resurrect the Devil King, for which some small things remained. Later, the night village near the mountain was very quiet and its streets were empty and dark. The door opened in the local tavern. A figure in a dark cloak and a hood on his head entered the room. The stranger walked past the rows of tables to the bar. The men present saw him off with intense looks. Approaching the bartender, the stranger asked to pour him the strongest drink available in this place. In a moment, there was a mug of pink liquid on the counter. It turned out that the strongest drink here is strawberry milk. The man in the raincoat took his order and brought it to his mouth. His long, sharp teeth became visible for a moment. Meanwhile, two local men approached the stranger. They asked how the stranger got to their village and mockingly claimed that they were not to be feared. Since there was no answer, the men decided that the guest had hearing problems. But this guess only gave birth to a new wave of jokes about sign language. But in a moment, the meaningless chatter of these two was interrupted by the heavy exhalation of the traveller. He said dejectedly that his rest was interrupted, and after a fraction of a second, he stretched his hand to the side and pierced the chest of one of the annoying local residents with it. A bloodied, lifeless body fell to the floor. The second man stood shocked and just looked at his friend who had been talking to him a few minutes ago. The blood on the hand made the mysterious guest thirsty. Captor was sleeping from his head, and everyone saw the terrible likeness of the monster hiding behind him. Shouts of demons and vampires began to spread through the room. Shinnok suddenly turned crimson. Cries of terror, despair, and pleas for help were heard everywhere. And the bloodthirsty enjoyed the blood, eating into the necks of the visitors. After everything around was destroyed and people were killed, the monster happily said that there was indeed delicious strawberry milk. And then he even regretted that he would not be able to enjoy it here anymore. Another bloodsucker approached the scene of the bloody massacre and greeted his friend Ior. It turned out that they came here for food. Bloodsuckers discussed taking all the humans into their lair to feed the others. The monsters laughed that only those who were fatter should be taken. Strange sounds began to reach them. Someone called for help. The vampires thought that it was their Zab mob partner who had become engrossed in playing with their victim. They shouted for him to finish because it was time to go back. But turning towards their friend, the monsters saw that it was he who was shouting for help. Someone in a raincoat twisted his neck. They remained standing like that, their mouths open in surprise. The unknown easily killed their partner. Then he called the bloodsuckers mosquitoes and lamented that they didn't know how to obey. Before them stood Firkin the Strong. The man roared so that the monsters gathered in front of his eyes. Otherwise, he threatened to take a fly swatter. Realizing that the vampire was killed by an ordinary person, the bloodthirsty became familiar. They bared their claws and fangs, ready to roll with the daredevil. Without thinking long, one of them rushed to Firkin the Strong, threatening to drink all the blood. And when he was already a few centimeters away from grabbing the opponent by the throat, he saw that behind the man was a giant figure of the essence of the forest. Taking advantage of the moment when the monster was confused by what he saw, Adol dealt him a devastating blow from the side. The dead monster's body fell at his friend's feet. The bloodsucker was only able to say Ior, the name of his friend. After that, the bloodthirsty shouted that he would leave everything as it was, and rose up to fly to his master and tell him everything. Firkin turned to the giant and said, pointing at the vampire, that it was a very bad bird. After that, the forest essence threw something with great force in pursuit of the fugitive. Turns out it was Adol. Such a move surprised everyone, but not least the bloodsucker who tried to get out of there. He shouted to the mage flying towards him why these strangers were so merciless towards vampires. Our main character watched as a member of their group dealt with the last monster in the air. And then I thought about how Adol would land. While the entity was catching the mage, the Ghost Lord mockingly remarked that death followed the warrior everywhere. But Firkin the Strong asked a counter-question. Does he not know why bloodthirsty pogroms were staged here? The name said that bloodsuckers often arrange such things, hiding among people. However, they hardly ever walk in packs. An exception may be the desire to take revenge on some hunter. Meanwhile, the essence of the forest perceived Adol as a ball to be caught. Another option as to why the vampires staged such a debacle was that their lord summoned his subjects to war. Firkin dismantled the rubble of the building and helped the survivors to get out. He asked if the bloodthirsty lord was a former colleague of Ghostly. It turned out that they rarely saw each other because they were in different states. Our hero asked why the leader summoned all the monsters. However, the partner didn't know, so he did not say anything sensible. Just assumed it might be a specific party. The rescued locals thanked for the rescue. However, Voitel instead asked only to answer their questions. But the man across from him kept his eyes on the essence of the forest, on whose forehead a mark was visible. The villager decided that before him was a descendant of a magical clan. But they explained to him that this is not so. He sees God. This put the man in a stupor. Firkin had to bring him back to his senses with a few kicks. He explained that it was not a magical god, as the local resident mistakenly thought. Voitel wanted to finally find out what happened here, and then he was going to let people go home. The stranger said that they were simple farmers and did not know the details. Monsters suddenly appeared, as if from nowhere. Vampires were first spotted a month ago in the dwarf village behind the mountain. In just a few minutes, they conquered the sacred place of the dwarves, the lava anvil. Then the bloodthirsty began to destroy the surrounding villages, take people and dwarves captive. It looked as if they had signed up for food. The man mused that the monsters had settled in this area, as if they were going to expand their front only near the mountain. They have been in this fortress for a long time, so it seems that the evil has planned something grandiose. Firkin noted that the farmer is very well informed, and the Phantom Lord wondered why he was engaged in farming. After the farmer left, our hero continued his conversation with the named one. Now their path lay to Lava Anvil. It was there that the heart of the earth was last located. The partners stood and looked into the distance. Voitel asked a rhetorical question if they had also come for the heart. And then he exhaled heavily, stating that nothing comes easily. The whole company went on the road. They could not give their hearts to some uninvited creatures. Meanwhile, the Vampire Lord received news that his soldiers had been killed by an ordinary human. This made him quite angry. The master decided that he could not leave such audacity unpunished. Whatever happened there and whoever the man was who destroyed his warriors. A huge monster appeared before the ruler, with a metal helmet in his hand. His time has come, the time of Mogalis Duran. Further events take place in Lava Anvil. It was there that the dwarves extracted magic stones from the stone walls. They were exhausted and complained of excruciating pain in their backs and arms, but they were not allowed to rest. The vampire made sure the process was continuous. He grabbed one laborer by the hair and shouted for him to return to work immediately. Other Corotunians also spoke against it. They were tired, hungry, and exhausted, and since they knew they would die anyway, they wanted to kill at least one monster. Such audacity only angered the bloodthirsty more. The vampire leader reacted to the noise. Lord Magister personally descended into the anvil to find out what had happened. The dwarves began to whisper that the lord of these mosquitoes, Master Vladriel, had come to them in his own person. The vampire overseer reported that the Corotunes were insisting on labor rights and demanding rest. The master noted that even the demon lord acted according to labor law, and they do not live in the Stone Age. When Vladriel said that the workers should be rested, the dwarves could not believe their ears. They even began to think that the Lord was actually good. However, they rejoiced in vain. The master formed a bloody ball in his palm, into which streams of blood from the workers began to flow. He said with satisfaction that they could rest. The monster will make them part of it. Drop by drop, the dwarfs lost their blood. And of course, all objections that they don't donate blood or have leukemia were ignored. In a moment, the two men fell dead, their bodies exhausted. The head of the vampires took all their blood to the last drop. Vladriel smugly asked if there were others who were very tired. He offered to grant eternal rest to those who wished. The workers shrugged their shoulders and went on to extract magic stones. Some justified their powerless position with respectable age. Like, when they were younger, they would have dealt with these monsters. At this time, the supervisor raised the head of the dwarf who was lying unconscious. The man had blue hands, affected by some disease. It was magical energy poisoning. Even the strong immunity that the Corotunes had did not help them safely mine such strong magic stones. When asked what to do with him next, the master remarked that if he left him, the man would soon die. And then he shouted that he should not teach how to deal with incapacitated slaves. The overseer bared his fangs with satisfaction and thanked him for the meal, preparing to feast on the poor man's blood. But before his teeth had time to touch the victim's neck, a large stone flew into his jaw with good force. Vladriel stared in surprise at his subordinate, who had fallen to the ground and could not understand why he could not drink the blood. A woman's scream was heard from the side. The red-haired girl unbent after a successful throw. She said that she would be able to cure the patient, but no one should touch him. The master teased her, asking if the best craftswoman Drua had visited them. And then he asked if she had already done everything he ordered. But the girl came for the magic stone, which was missing. When the craftswoman ran up to the sick man and gave him a bottle of medicine, Vladriel said that she should be in the workshop, and then he raised his bloody weapon with a swing and drove right at the man's head. This time, the monster did not kill. However, he emphasized that this is only a one-time action. The best way to save everyone is not sympathy, but a quick completion of the creation of the heart of the earth. Next, the Lord of Vampires prepared to leave, and at the end, only slightly turning his head to Drua, he noted that his patience was already running out, so he should hurry. And laughed out loud. The master flew to the watchtower. There he asked one of his subjects where the travelers had already reached. After greeting the master, the soldier reported everything. 2 days ago, the group started crossing the mountain. Vladril concluded that they should meet him very soon. The vampire wanted to avenge the death of his people by sending his super soldier to deal with our heroes. Mogalis Duran stood ready at the exit of the mountain and waited. The group of travelers was about to leave, but no one was seen or heard. Suddenly, on the side of the exit, the foot of the mountain began to collapse. Stones were falling and rolling down. Firkin the Strong punched his way, creating a new cave as he went. He cheerfully shouted to his friends that he had found a path that led to the exit. The Ghost Lord laughed that the road was not created by destroying walls. However, our hero had a different opinion. If he said it was expensive, then it was. The conversation was interrupted by a strange companion of our heroes. The creature quickly ran out onto the road and tried to escape. Adol walked, pulling 2 of the same captives by the hair. He regretted not being able to keep them all. The Named asked why he was so upset. The magician replied that he would lose experience if he lost his prisoners. The Ghost Lord snorted that there was no normal in their company. Firkin said he likes the situation, all must be taught in full. So, the creature runs everywhere. That's why it still remains alive. But not a minute passed as their fugitive prisoner fell with a spear in his back, never reaching freedom. So our main character noted that the most important thing is not work, but luck. Without it, all efforts are meaningless. In front of the mountain stood armed and armored dwarves. They saddled war boars and prepared for battle with strangers. The warrior said that, by all accounts, they had come to the right place. Although he did not count on such a solemn reception, the leader of the Korotun army took his spear from the dead man's back and ordered the uninvited guests to name themselves whether they were allies or enemies. The appearance of the company suggested that they were just wandering robbers. However, Adol objected, saying that they were wizards, but the presence of the Named One and the essence of the forest did not inspire confidence. Therefore, the commander of the dwarves, convinced that dark magicians were in front of him, ordered to kill them all. Our hero really liked the prospect of a fight. He noted that physical force is not the only way to solve the problem, but it is the fastest. After these words, one of the dwarves ordered to stop. He got off the boar and said that he could not believe his eyes. It was a meeting of old friends. Leric and Firkin joked and mocked each other after years of not seeing each other. And while below, at the foot of the mountain, the 2 old friends laughed merrily and joked, a vampire mercenary was watching them from above. The warrior and the dwarf continued to laugh, glad to see each other. Our main character noticed that the difficult nature of his comrade remained the same, and the squire in response mentioned the man's considerable appetite. Their conversation was interrupted by the dwarf commander. He asked Leric who this stranger was. At the same time, he called the subordinate a kumungwan, and this meant both the position of a military advisor and a not very skilled soldier. This angered Firkin. He began to shout that the dwarven commander had the right to call his friend such a name. He must treat the warrior with respect. Even if he looks like a slacker, his education is still on top. When there was an opportunity to insert a few words, the dwarf told the chief that he was a legendary warrior who had been defeated by the devil. The commander of the army was quite surprised, and then he turned to our hero with apologies for his rudeness. The commander excused himself that he did not want to offend Leric, but addressed him as a military advisor. This news surprised the man. He asked an old friend if he was really retired, and in response I heard confirmation and complaints about age and back pain. Leric then asked Firkin what he was doing here, and then he pointed to the other members of the group and asked who those monsters were behind. Among the others, the dwarf recognized the Phantom King, and that raised even more questions. The winner leaned into his friend's ear and briefly told what brought him here. The dwarf's eyes grew rounder by the minute. Korotun listened to the story to the end and laughed out loud. He didn't seem to believe that Firkin was serious about turning Bendel into a lich to retrieve the lost holy sword. Realizing that this was not a joke, but slightly doubting that the old friend was in his right mind, the dwarf assumed that the warrior was here because of the magic stone. Our hero confirmed that he really needed the Earth Heart. He has already started a speech that he is not frivolous and understands all responsibility. But Leric did not let him finish and said that the man can take the stone. Firkin looked at his friend in surprise, but the only condition was that the hero must somehow get it. The dwarf said that there are many bloodsuckers. Vladriel appeared in these parts last month. The monster captured the fortress and constantly harassed the dwarves, creating a lot of problems for them. The main character asked a friend how as for the soldiers of Lava Anvil. In response, he heard that the head of the vampires and the Firkin were not the only ones looking for the heart of the earth. At one time, the dwarves descended deep into the mountain range. Then they saw for the first time the heart of the earth, an incredible size block of red magic stones. And soon, when the rumors about the heart spread quickly, various interested parties began to flock to this place. They were both demons and barbarians from the north. The dwarves then emptied all their supplies to contain them, but the fortress was eventually lost. Firkin said it should be returned. But the matter was not so easy. Leric said that the enemies were taking hostages from the people of the fortress. Haste can lead to big losses. Then the dwarf reluctantly said that he already had all these magical stones in front of his throat. He even wants to force a friend to take the heart and throw it away. After listening to the friend's story to the end, our hero promised him to bring him the head of the Lord of Vampires. But this angered the dwarf. He once again reminded that such reckless actions can harm peaceful people. And Firkin the Strong cold-bloodedly noted that it would not be possible to save everyone. Besides, while they are talking here, they are sacrificing these same peaceful people. Accepting that his friend was right, Leric added that Vladriel was not alone at the heart. There is another with them, the infamous commander of the Demon King. Meanwhile, the army commander fell to his knees and held his head. Something strange was happening to him. The dwarf seems to have begun to transform into the Joker. In a moment, he already rushed at our main character with a spear. The dwarf's eyes burned with red fire, and his body seemed to be controlled by someone. Firkin immediately neutralizes the attacker with a strong blow to the head. It was not possible to frighten him, but such sudden aggression surprised the man. But the surprises didn't end there. Turning around, the man saw that the army of dwarves had also turned red-eyed and stood in battle readiness, pointing their spears at him. Voitel assumed that the whole squad was attacked by something, but Leric understood what was the matter. He arrived. The mage Morgalis Duran was behind this metamorphosis that took place with the dwarven army. Our protagonist looked up to the top to see who had caused such a mess, but a friend stopped him and forbade him to watch. Coratun said that when you look at Morgalis, you can immediately lose your common sense. Leric recalled that such excesses had already happened to our hero in the past. He continued to speak so that the warrior would focus on his words. After all, together they could defeat this enemy, even though he was very cunning. The dwarf took the axe firmly and ordered his friend to prepare. After his heavy blow, Firkin had to step in, but Strong was no longer in control of himself. When the man turned around, the boy saw crimson eyes and understood everything. Decades ago, the main character stood before Bendel, Arellano, and the King of Men, and was surprised and glad that they were all right. And in a moment, he opened his eyes and realized that such a realistic vision from the past was only a dream. Meanwhile, one warrior from the gnome squad was preparing to attack. His red eyes were glowing with anger, and he was clutching a weapon in his hand. His fervor, awakened by dark magic, set out to quell the essence of the forest. Calm, mysterious, with shining blue eyes, he grasped the dwarf's head in his hands. At first, the short man panicked, his eyes filled with fear and then with determination. He said that they would not be his slaves. In a moment, the entity let go of his hands. The warrior has already come to his senses. He was on his knees and couldn't understand what had happened. One by one, the soldiers were freed from Morgalis Duran's magic. All, as one, complained of a headache and did not remember anything that had happened. Leric shouted for all who would come to their senses to take up arms. They had to free those who were still out of their minds. And then the dwarf returned to the essence of the forest and said that their biggest problem was the reincarnated Firkin the Strong. The warrior held his head, feeling terrible pain. He repeated the name Bendel, and his red eyes filled with anger. The dwarf decided that there was no point in waiting, so he rushed at his friend with an axe. But the victor immediately neutralized the attacker with a heavy blow to the head. Next, Adol tried to bring his friend back to normal. However, his attack was easily repulsed. Firkin was now repeating the name Arl. It was obvious to the magician that the man was not himself. so the boy decided to help him by using magic. But in a moment, our hero played a self-confident young man. Lyric watched this, noting that his friend is already old, but fights as hard as in his youth. Then he asked the Ghost King if he was going to watch for long. The named one was lying on a makeshift deck chair and drinking a sweet, otherworldly cocktail of douches. He noted that the dwarf was already too old and weak to withstand the warrior's blows. But Korotan noted that Ghostly is missing a great opportunity to fight Firkin the Strong. It worked. Lyric said that he never thought that he would one day team up with the Ghost Lord to defeat the warrior. And the named one did not imagine that he would one day join the battle against the Demon King's army with such companions. The Lord of the Dead possessed mental magic that was not the best among magicians. A powerful blue energy began to gather around him. His plan to break the established control was to kill the spellcaster himself. It was the only effective way, or it was necessary to kindly hit him with something shocking. At this time, Adol was already well exhausted and stood before the possessed Firkin with no strength. And at this time, our chief continued to live in his visions. He saw himself as a young man with his friends on the eve of the battle with the two-headed dragon. The man wondered how weak he had been before. He now knew all of the monster's weak points, and it had once been a difficult battle. Through the veiled vision, the hero tried to remember what important thing he had to do. Meanwhile, in reality, he confronted his friends. Firkin remarked that there had been great times before with the foursome's various adventures. He wondered if it would be like this every time if it weren't for the demon war. It sounded in the darkness that these were only words. Our protagonist looked around to see who said it. In a very familiar intonation, someone convinced that the cause of loneliness lies in the warrior himself. He blamed others in vain. The man could not stand it and shouted that the interlocutor had no idea what it was like to be happy, so he better shut up. But the image of young Firkin continued to tell that our hero lost his sword and became the cause of Bendel's death. The image convinced that the warrior would not have sacrificed Arrol if he had not lost his sword, the King of Men had not changed, and Bendel had not died. Voitel was to blame for everything. The man interrupted his interlocutor. He reminded himself that he was doing everything possible and impossible to find the sword and turn back time. But the vision continued to push. That shame prompts the hero to search to remove the stigma of a warrior who lost a holy sword, and also a thirst for revenge against the Demon King. The young image convinced that it was only selfishness. After all, no one except the hero can own a holy sword. The Ghost King placed his hand on the warrior's shoulder. He said, "It's good that he will come to his senses, and now it's time for him to catch a blow. He must either come to his senses or die." And behind the named one were the hero's friends, ready to do whatever it takes to save Firkin. Lyric said that if his friend was hit by such an attack, he would definitely be angry. And at that moment, our hero hit the ground with his fist. A wave of strong energy spread from his location. The dwarf immediately fell to the ground and covered his head with his hands. Adol asked what he was doing. It was an attempt to protect oneself, as in the case of a nuclear explosion. Our main character channeled his incredible strength and hit himself on the cheek. His friends tried to stay as far away as possible so as not to get hurt. After a while, Firkin regained consciousness. He stood with his head slightly lowered. A mark from the blow was visible on the cheek. Lyric breathed a sigh of relief. He believed in his friend, but he was worried. Adol couldn't believe that the man had straightened himself out with a slap. The soldier stood in front of his friends, morally devastated. He said only that he was in a bad mood. Mogalis Duran was receding further and further, flying higher and higher through the air on his horse, leaving chaos in his wake. Firkin the Strong stared after him, fists clenched tightly. His mood was ruined because of this thief. He remembered that he had dealt with this type in the distant past. But then Bendel was alive, so he didn't pay attention to it. The Phantom King wrote down in his notes that the Great Conqueror had a weak point: mental attacks. The dwarf was worried that his friend would fall into Megalis's trap again, but our hero squinted his eyes so as not to look. Duran turned to the people below. He held his head in his hand, his helmet burning with a fiery eye. Then he started talking to our main character, recognizing an old acquaintance. The monster mockingly asked if Firkin liked the present. He regretted that the hero was able to return to reality and did not enjoy visions from the past. But no one appreciated such a pathetic speech. Because of the great distance, no one understood anything. And Primani joked that this was a consequence of missing vocal cords. Mogalis Duran and the Phantom King were not overlooked by his dark attention. He asked him what he was doing in this company. Had he really become Voitel's faithful dog? And while the commander of the evil forces was comforting himself with his jokes, Adol suddenly appeared behind him and struck with his staff. The surprise effect worked. The rider still could not understand how a person was able to fly up, because it is not characteristic of them. But the surprises did not end there. 3 dwarves with spears struck hard. How they got so far through the air also remained a mystery to the opponent. While Mogalis twirled his helmet to figure out what was going on, the forest essence launched the dwarves one by one and caught them. A powerful attack was launched below. Realizing that this was the handiwork of a creature that had stripped him of his control over the minds of many dwarves, the rider rushed to destroy this powerful opponent. While the giant was throwing the dwarves, he involuntarily made eye contact with the enemy. The entity's eyes turned red. In a moment, the Dark Commander found himself on a green lawn. This surprised him quite a bit. The giant monster had a flower garden in his head, but he felt strangely calm. As Mogalis searched for his target, pondering how to find such a desirable soul, he was watched by the essence of the forest. And then the giant raised his huge hand to finish off the intruder like a bug, while the rider was convincing that he was not a bug. Our main character appeared next to him. He wanted to finish what he had started because he did not like to postpone everything for later. This pleased the rider. He extended his charms to the dwarven warriors, noting that not all fight like the warrior. And the look of the Dark Commander will find everyone. No one has yet been able to escape. Firkin slammed his fist into the ground, splitting the top layer. The dwarves standing nearby fell from the force of the shockwave. The man once again emphasized that he does not like to postpone for later. After that, a bright wave of light flooded everything around. The Ghost Lord recognized it. There was an aura of death around him after 3 receptions. In another moment, Mogalis Duran lost his helmet. He felt an explosion inside him, and then, confused, he released his head. So the headdress ended up at the Ghost King's feet. The latter did not think long, lifted the helmet and raised it over his head, preparing to put it on. While Firkin and Adol were busy beating the Dark Rider, the named one pulled the headdress over his head. Seeing that Phantom had appropriated someone else's thing, our main character drew the attention of his partner to this. The warrior warned that the Lord of the Dead had better behave himself. If he planned a riot, he will pay for it. But the king did it only out of curiosity. He approached Adol to find out if the boy had told them the truth before the trip, and got into the magician's head. Once inside the boy's mind, the Lord of the Dead saw an abandoned room where there were many valuable magical books. It seemed that someone lived there. While trying to find Adol in this place, the uninvited guest saw flashes of light outside the building. So I decided to go to them. But when he got closer, he felt that energy was burning. The Ghost King noticed a huge monster that looked like it was made of energy. He was holding an electric coil in his hands and threatening someone with it. The next moment, this ball of energy flew down. There stood a young man who calmly accepted the challenge. Even though 1,000,000 volts were flying at him, he simply raised his hand up and absorbed a fantastic amount of energy. Of course, his opponent did not expect this. The young man joked that next time, this creature had better use cotton wool. And then he accumulated a powerful energy ball and launched it at the opponent. This shot was victorious. From the massive sparks and flashes came cries that this was an electric knight of the first class. And no one dares to treat him like that. Ghost Lord realized that this guy was a doll. He was not just a mage, but possessed a powerful power on par with great sorcerers. The young man asked the sage who was watching him what the result was. The named realized that it was Master Halvar Brighton. It turns out that everything the guy said earlier was true. Meanwhile, Adol zealously explained that he had proven his strength and that Lightning Peak was now under his power. He understood that the battle was only with the scarecrow summoned by the master, but he was sure that he would be able to defend himself. The boy asked to be allowed to leave this forest, but the teacher did not let him go, assuring him that he was not ready yet. Even an old man like him could defeat such a spirit. Halvar tried to convince his ward that knowledge is power, so the young man needs to stop whining and build up his strength. And although the young man continued to deny and proved that he won in a difficult duel, the mentor said that it is not worth even thinking about leaving the forest and resting. Adol reluctantly called the teacher an old man and left, and the master, smiling, corrected that he was a sage, not an old man. The Ghost King watched this scene and could not understand what was going on. How was the young man able to defeat the powerful spirit? And what is the mentor hiding from him? Why keeps in the forest? The named wanted to know what Adol was hiding. The guy was a powerful magician, but now he is like dust. The Watcher saw the door and wanted to know what secrets were behind it. But as soon as he stretched out his hands to open them, the master turned towards the uninvited guest and called him by name. This aroused the interest of Primani. He wondered if it was Halvar's will or if he had transferred his consciousness into the boy. The sage moved to the door and said that there is no place for the Lord of the Dead. The master said that he would not go any further, and then called himself the 13th Lich, Halvar Brighton, and promised to always follow the uninvited guest. After that, he raised his hands and the Ghost King began to return to reality. Named regained consciousness on the ground already without a helmet saying something about the 13th Lich. Firkin was standing over him and asked what he was doing. In response, it was said that the winner was right. He is real. Of course, our hero did not understand anything. That's why Phantom had to explain that inside Adol lives a strong and great sage. And the guy himself is a genius. In his childhood, he had cool power, like first-class magicians. The boy also approached them. He held his head, outraged that his mind had been strolled so unceremoniously. Firkin! The strong still could not understand what was happening. Then the Lord of the Dead pointed his finger at the young man and said that everything was there. What the warrior is looking for! Meanwhile, Iodor is in the capital of the Iron Empire. In the castle, 2 knights trained to fight with swords. The match is over, Orn said with a smile that he knew he couldn't win. Duchan Far Wen, vice-captain of the First Order of Knights, entered the room. He mockingly applauded the participants of the fight. Orn Zargan met the man without enthusiasm. He asked what he needed. They never exchanged pleasantries. The vice-captain then asked if the rumors were true. Smiling, he repeated what everyone was talking about, the failure of the mission. The knight asked if ridicule was the only purpose of this visit. Wen picked up the sword he had taken from Orn's partner and began to humiliate the warrior by failing and fleeing. He said that it discredits the First Knight Order and Zargan is better off hiding in a corner like it used to be. A third knight intervened in this tense conversation. It turned out that under the armor was a fair-haired girl. She stood between the 2 men and asked them to stop fighting. The vice-captain condescendingly lowered his weapon. He invited Calrose to come over to his side, but the girl refused. Wen asked what the reason was. After all, she was doing a great job on the battlefield, and now she was wasting her time here. But Cal said that she only has a 4-day job here. There were no further explanations. Meanwhile, Orn decided to leave because the mood was already spoiled. But Duchan dragged his sword across the floor to attract attention. Then he said that he forgot to ask something. Holding a flaming weapon in his hand, he asked where the warrior was now. Already at the door, Zargan heard that the warrior's mission had been transferred to Wen by order of His Majesty. He had to correct all the mistakes. In response, the knight just laughed loudly, hearing that this boy was going to meet the Lord of Light. Meanwhile, our team was trying to figure out what the Ghost King had seen. Everyone looked at Adol. Firkin took everything literally and thought that the lost holy sword was inside the boy. The man was already holding an axe to get to what he wanted, but Ghostly clarified what exactly he meant. A great magical energy is hidden inside the young man. What he felt was equal to the heart of the earth. The warrior clarified whether he understood correctly that Adol is not a holy sword at all, but a living heart of the earth. That is, they needed to make a sacrifice to put everything together. These words somewhat confused the essence of the forest. Firkin the Strong pointed at the young man and asked if they really wanted to use him as a sacrifice instead of the heart of the earth. The Ghost King only confirmed and chuckled, but in response he heard that this was not a party of demons for him. That's not how things are done. But the Phantom King did not see the difference. Our main character noted that the essence is in the deity. If you take his soul, no one will notice. But Adol is a magician. It will be impossible to do without magic. The boy said that no one could break the seal inside him. That is why he is looking for his teacher. He blocked his power, and only he can break the lock. Leric approached Voitel, holding a helmet in his hands. The dwarf asked what to do with Morgullis Duran. The Dark Rider lay unconscious on the ground near the stone. He was well suffocated, so he should not have regained consciousness soon. Duran was a golem, one of the living armors. It was created by the ancient Great Master Wizard Amar. Hundreds of years after the mage's death, the Demon King found living armor in his temple that protected the legacy. He resurrected the strongest of them and made him supreme commander. It was Morgullis Duran. Our main character said it's time to go. They have to catch that mosquito and take the heart of the earth. But his friend asked how they could get into the castle. Corotons could not overcome this path on foot. In addition, the horse of their prisoner escaped. The master will now increase his guard when he sees that the horse has returned without its commander. Firkin was about to go through the main entrance. It all seemed like trifles to him. But Leric shouted that there must be another way because they had captured an enemy general. Comrade offered to try negotiations. Diplomacy never failed. And at this time, the Phantom King stood with his helmet in his hands. And here was found an even better way to penetrate the lair of vampires. After some time, a group of people in black cloaks approached the main entrance to the castle. The guards recognized Morgullis Duran's outfit. However, the energy from the armor was not purple, but blue. In Lava Anvil, the work of cleaning the heart of the earth continued. Dwarf smiths worked without rest with a small piece of magic stone. After many manipulations, a piece of red gem rose above the blacksmith's table, illuminating everything around with crimson light. Drua and her two companions watched with bated breath. The piece of stone finally became the purified heart of the earth. The men rejoiced that 3 sleepless days had finally been crowned with success. But the girl carefully examined the result of their work and noticed a small crack that spread through the stone. She grabbed the hammer and smashed the creation. The other dwarves grabbed their heads. The hope of rest after many hours of work shattered right before their eyes. Drua explained that the cleanup would break on first interaction if done at low speed. The girl ordered to start the melting furnace again. One of her partners remarked that they risked not being able to handle the burst of magical energy. But the craftswoman reminded that right now, the dwarves are being treated like slaves and they are dying. So their job is to complete this task as soon as possible. The master secretly watched what was happening in the forge. He felt a great magical power, so he came to look at the work. The vampire lord held a small piece of red stone, wondering how much power was released from it. But he asked if this really wasn't all he was capable of. Drua said to this that the work is still in progress. You have to wait. But she reminded me of the Magister's promise to guarantee the safety of the dwarves. It was because of this condition that she was going to see the matter through. The bloodsucker laughed, nodding in agreement. But he added that they had better hurry, because he was losing patience. He then placed his clawed hand on the girl's shoulder and added ominously that the dwarves would no longer be able to enjoy the 4-day work week. The master threw after him that there was no worse boss to look for. But the master only said that he never promised that outsiders would be able to sign the insurance. Drua shouted at him that he was the outsider here. At that moment, one of his subjects ran to the lord. The vampire screamed that the owner had to see something with his own eyes. Next, the chief bloodsucker was led to show the horse Morgullis, which had arrived at the castle without a rider. Vladriel was worried if Duran was in trouble. If these are not order punishers, then only one person could defeat its commander. Then he ordered the guard to be doubled from the castle gate itself to the secret passage. The master could not allow anyone to interfere with the Demon King's resurrection, which was already so close. Therefore, he had to prepare well for any development of events. And the guards brought our heroes into the castle. As the vampires thought, Morgullis Duran brought bound human captives. The bloodsuckers were standing around and hurling abuse at the captives. They remembered what happened to their brothers, who came together in battle with humans. The monsters praised Megalis and his magic, thinking that he had single-handedly defeated the enemy squad. And the day before, Firkin the Strong talked with the Phantom Lord, convincing him to take part in the operation. In return, the hero promised to promote him again to the king, and if everything goes well, then to the emperor. The warrior argued that the ability to carry one's own head was very rare, so the named one should use it. The Spirit King looked unenthusiastically at the protagonist. However, he asked what exactly he should do. Maybe attack and destroy like the warrior does. A dwarf intervened in the conversation. Leric said that the stone's magical energy must be purified first, and only dwarves could do it. And since Firkin wanted the heart of the earth, it was in his best interest to help the Korotuns complete their work. The warrior placed his hand on the Phantom Lord's shoulder. He told him that they had a great opportunity to help people and get what they wanted. But the named one noted that only a warrior needs all this. The Spirit King wants only one thing, to take the soul of our hero. The warrior appreciated the desire of his partner by raising his thumb up, and he immediately voiced his opinion. He wanted the ghost to parody Megalis Duran. Everything was decided. The Spirit King agreed to enter the castle, and although this plan was not to everyone's liking, they did not have a better one. Firkin revealed the next strategy. The Phantom must pretend to have captured them, tie them up, and enter the castle. Then they have to take the captives, and the named one distracts Vladriel at this time. So once they were inside, the named one asked the vampire accompanying them where the master was now, and then everything went haywire. The bloodthirsters, realizing that there was a warrior in front of them, rushed to carry out the Lord's order to kill the enemies. But Firkin Strong in battle felt like a fish in water. He mutilated monsters, broke their arms, and abused them morally, even with their hands tied. After one of these blows, the bloodsucker fell on the Spirit King and he dropped his helmet. This confused all the Blood Eaters around, who had no idea who was really in front of them. And while they were trying to figure out what was going on with Megalis Duran's head, a part of Ghost lay on the floor and thought he was definitely going to be disgraced in rank. At that moment, the prisoners broke the ropes. Firkin said the plan is now null and void. Then you need to act according to the situation. 2 vampires stood on either side of the door. They heard footsteps in the dark corridor. Someone was approaching. Bloodsuckers shouted into the darkness to find out who was there. In response, Voitel called himself a murderer. The monsters said that soul lips don't talk like that. And immediately after these words, blows rained down on them. After killing the guards, the man kicked the door and shouted that he had come to save the prisoners, so everyone can get out. And half an hour before that, the King of Spirits tried to penetrate the consciousness of one of the vampires with the help of a helmet to find out where the dwarves were. He named several places in different parts of the castle. Adol and the Forest Essence were finishing up dealing with the Blood Eaters. Meanwhile, our main character nicknamed his partner the Phantom Vassal, but credit to his talent for sticking his head back on. The named person noted that he is, after all, a first-star Archelic. But this did not make an impression on the warrior. He only asked what the meaning of 1 star was. You need at least 5 stars to benefit. Firkin asked why, with such mind control power, his partner didn't use secret penetration. Primani explained that these are borrowed skills through the helmet. He does not claim such a scale. Megalis had a body to control an army of living armor, while the Spirit King's body was meant to bring the dead to life. Meanwhile, our hero decided that it was necessary to split up in order to cover all the named places. The search continued, but still didn't yield any results. Ghost created a navigation mod and was with the warrior in the form of a vampire. Other members of the group did not find Korotuni either. Doubts began to creep up on them that the information was true, but the named one assured that everything was true because the mind control was successful. It is more likely that the prisoners were transferred somewhere. Firkin began to wonder how the vampires could have known of their arrival to displace the dwarves as he killed the bloodsuckers immediately. The Phantom Lord saw something in the part of the castle where Adol had gone. The young man really found something, but not what everyone hoped for. In one of the rooms lay a bloody corpse of a dwarf. The boy covered the body with a cloth and paid his last respects to the deceased. What was seen testified to the incredible cruelty of the killers. Suddenly, from a dark corner of the room, a weak plea for help began to be heard. Looking closely, Adol noticed a cage. In it sat a Korotun and asked to let him out. The young man bent down to open the door. But looking closely, he noticed that the dwarf's body was covered with blue manifestations of magical addiction. The prisoner begged to be released. He was sick. The boy saw that he paid the control, the mana began to flow and was about to break in a moment. When Adol moved away from the explosion, he saw 3 vampires in front of him. It became clear that they had been lured into a trap. Bloodsuckers forced the team to disperse, used dwarves as bait, found weak spots. And it worked. Vampires began to attack the young man. However, the magician did not back down either. He skillfully fought back. Firkin listened to what was happening there with the help of the Lich's hologram. The boy avoided attacks and at the right moments dealt strong blows to opponents. But when all that remained was to finish off the lying one, Adol's fist caught the giant vampire right in the air. The master covered monsters of a higher rank for this task. The same big guys came to deal with the essence of the forest. Firkin began shaking the bloodsucker that was the transmitter to find out where his friends were and help them. But the bloodthirsty fell dead. At the moment when the connection with the warrior was cut off, the Master Magister came down to the Ghost King's room. The dwarves stood in a group among the mountains not far from the castle. The commander and advisor discussed the lack of a signal from their comrades. But Leric was sure that this mission was easy for our hero. They agreed to be ready because at any moment their help in battle may be needed. Returning the captives was the main task. At this time, a suspicious stranger arrived at the Korotun camp. He was immediately surrounded by spears. The stranger asked to remove the weapon from him and then denied the phrase that he was doubtful, but the gnomes stood their ground. Only one mask confirmed that this guest was suspicious. They laughed, asking what kind of cosplay it was. The dwarves demanded to remove the mask and show their faces. The unknown person saw that the conversation had reached a dead end, so he tried to demonstrate his ability to possess 100 times gravity. But the soldiers did not even know the meaning of this word, because in the Middle Ages, this concept was not yet known. After being shaken by the magic, they firmly decided that there was some kind of madman in front of them. The masked stranger stated that dwarves really have a remarkable ability to resist magic. And I wondered if it wasn't due to the lack of outstanding mental abilities. Wen appeared next to the stranger. The vice-captain tried to smooth the corners by saying that gravity was the discovery of a warm welcome. They are happy to see these warriors in 100-fold size. The soldier tried to calm the dwarves and prove that they were not suspicious at all. Leric looked around the guests and noticed that they did not look like ordinary adventurers at all. And if they needed the steel anvil, then the effort was in vain. No one can enter the fortress, but Wen immediately said that he was not interested in the House of Gnomes. He is looking for his friend here, Firkin the Strong. The stranger continued to question whether Voitel had gone this way. And Leric frowned more and more, looking at the stranger. And in the castle at that time, comrades who had not seen each other for 30 years met. Vladriel asked what the first Ghost King was doing here. The named replied that he was no longer a Ghost King, although he could communicate through spirits. But the Lord of Vampires barely heard it over the noise of the battle coming from other floors. The master asked what his old acquaintance was doing in the company of an unknown mercenary, a huge monster and an old warrior. After all, he is a great figure who once led the Demon King's army. The interlocutor said that he once thought the same way, until he was defeated by Firkin the Strong. He noted that this old warrior broke spirits with his bare hands. For 30 years he was between life and death and conquered all the mighty powers of the continent. Stopping him is another task. The most surprising thing was that his strength was not a magical gift or accident, but the result of training and strength. Vladriel noted with regret that his friend had weakened. The vampire asked if it was a conscious choice to betray the Demon King and bow to this warrior's power. The named noted that he was an active member of the Dark Lord's army. And unrighteousness is one of the beliefs of the wicked. Betrayal is also normal. And then he asked if the vampire's loyalty did not speak of his right. The master laughed. But then he offered to betray Voitel and rejoin the army of evil. But the Lord of the Dead noted that treason must also have benefits. So he asked what he wanted and how exactly he was supposed to stop the warrior who was already well pissed off. Vladriel pointed out that a comrade as a soldier in the Demon King's army should be trash. However, he added that the resurrection of their ruler is near. The vampire was certain that the heart of the earth would soon be in his possession. And this place had enough souls to perform the ritual. And because of the sacrifice of the dwarfs, the king is translated as a lich. However, the named one calmly and with a smile asked if his old friend was sure that their lord was dying at all. Did he see his corpse or his soul? What about the death certificate? How will he resurrect someone who did not die? These questions put the master in a stupor. The vampire yelled what that meant. Was the king really alive? However, Ghostly said that he would know for sure only when he checked. And now, it's Schrödinger's spirit king. Vladriel didn't want to listen anymore. He said that he would not doubt because of empty talk. The master wanted to give a chance to an old acquaintance, considering his merits in the past. Named noted that opinions among the four commanders were always divided, especially with regard to who is still stronger than them. So, it was decided to find out. Adol, meanwhile, was fighting a vampire. The monster breathed flames and had already thoroughly exhausted the boy. Assessing his chances, the boy took out a small bottle and threw it in front of the bloodsucker, having fenced off the flame with a blue curtain. There was mana in the vessel, which filled the young man. He warned his opponent to be careful, because the mage had not practiced for a long time, in the distant past, when young Adol was sealed by the master with magic. Then the boy stood confused, feeling that his magic was scattered around, but he could not collect it. The internal mana chain breaking spell, also known as magic sealing, is basic but very dangerous. However, it is effective to block the opponent's mana flow. Now, Adol had to devote himself to strength training. The teacher noted that an experienced mage can neutralize sealing magic, and if you use a surprise attack, even lychees will become easy prey. It doesn't matter how powerful a wizard is if he can't use his magic. Therefore, having devoted himself to strength training, the boy will be ready for situations in which he will not be able to use charms. Adol thought and asked the master if the internal mana could not be used, then whether he could collect it from external sources. But the mentor said that the magic flows were blocked, so it wouldn't work. But the boy did not back down. He was sure that the magic chain was like a river whose channel had been blocked, but it had found another course. Therefore, external mana can be absorbed and then used. The teacher stroked the young man's head and told him that 300 years ago, someone already had a similar theory. But mana flows, like a nervous system, are very complex. It is very risky to make a mistake in this matter. Adol interrupted the master's story and asked why he couldn't just do it like that, and took his hand. Mana from the teacher's body began to flow to the student. Halvar could not believe his eyes. This young man of change will create a new flow of mana in such a short time, and it really worked. And now, in the fight with the bloodthirsty, the boy was going to use the same technique. He remembered again that long-forgotten, heavy, unsettling feeling. It was like going back in time again. The vampire charged, thinking that some trivial magic was waiting for him. But Adol, remembering how to use such power, met him with a powerful blow of sharp ice fragments. The next step of the well-thought-out counterattack was the fall of a huge stone block on the bloodsucker. Barely holding a fragment of the wall on his shoulders, the bloodthirsty lamented that the opponent woke up as an ordinary warrior, but in fact had such a pumped skill tree. And even in this position, he continued to threaten. The young man assured that he was using magic for the first time today, and then struck again. The vampire managed to jump back and hang under the ceiling. He shouted that the opponent turned out to be a magician, and asked how many elements he possesses. Adol raised his hand, pointing a finger straight at his opponent. Then he calmly and confidently answered that he had mastered all the elements. Bloodsucker shouted that it was impossible. In this case, the boy must be an archmage, no less. But the young man formed an energy ball in his hand to strike and listed what he possessed: fire, water, wind, earth, and blood. The vampire couldn't believe it was true. And when Adol was about to deliver a decisive blow, the mana ran out. Of course, the opponent took advantage of the moment and rushed at the boy. He asked with satisfaction what the mage would use now. But the young man was not confused and kindly hit his opponent in the jaw with his fist, and then he added that it was time for physical training. The bloodsucker held his jaw and could not understand who he was fighting, a mage or a warrior. What was happening confused him thoroughly. Adol held 2 more bottles of mana in his hand. He said if it's a vampire's dying wish, then he'll tell who he is. Crushing the containers and absorbing the magic that was in them, the boy said that he was just a duck mage. The bloodsucker screamed from the realization that he was going to lose, but still threatened to destroy the young man. However, this did not scare Adol at all. He used a spell as he prepared to neutralize the enemy. At this time, Firkin the Strong broke through the wall, and finally he got it, and the man ran into the room. The soldier asked if he really heard something here, or if it was all his imagination. Our main character began to tell the young man that he was worried about where everyone had gone. And when he heard the noise, he came here. The conqueror then asked who Adol had fought and where his opponent was now. The boy replied that the man himself would be able to see if he stopped trampling on him. The vampire was lying on the floor, covered in a mountain of stones and broken walls. And in the other part of the castle, Vladriel and Phantom decided who was stronger. The Lord of the Dead wounded his opponent and killed several of his subjects. And now he ordered to surrender, which angered him. The Lich himself no longer had one hand, as his opponent reminded him. But these were little things that no one paid attention to. Vladriel assured that the one-armed would definitely lose, and his opponent assured that he would simply grow a new limb. At this time, representatives of the Order entered the room. Meanwhile, in another part of the Firkin fortress, the Strong and Adol interrogated the captured vampire. They wanted to know where the dwarves were kept. In order to quickly untie the monster's tongue, the boys resorted to magic. Our hero offered the blood drinker to choose what he wants to get to know: fire, water, or lightning. Assessing his situation as hopeless, Vampire told that the dwarves were 30 floors above, near the main passage. There was a room where prisoners were kept. Our main character asked why the dwarves were kept there. The bloodsucker said that the Kortuns were just victims in a sacrificial procession. The monster told about his brother's plan to revive the Demon King and give him a new life. That's what they needed souls for. Having heard enough, Firkin the Strong ordered Adol to destroy the prisoner with lightning. Despite the fact that he told everything, the fact that it was a demon became decisive. The young man asked if they had killed the informer too soon. But the warrior understood everything. The vampires turned this place into a wasteland because it was near the heart of the earth and then kidnapped people for their sacrifices. But Voitel was more interested in why the boy pretended to be a simple warrior when he knew how to use magic. But Adol recalled that he immediately introduced himself as a magician. Besides, he couldn't use this skill for long. If a reboot happens, it can lead to a magical cataclysm. And elixirs were expensive. Our main character suggested using the infinite magic of the King of the Dead. Then, the need for elixirs will disappear. Firkin said it was time to go get the prisoners. The young man asked if they would not help others before that, but the man didn't even think about it. The essence of the forest was great at handling 2 vampires at the same time, almost driving them crazy with his charms. As for the Spirit King, he'll be fine if he doesn't want to become a slave. Everything will be fine with him. While talking, they approached the stairs. Now it was necessary to climb 30 floors up. Firkin the Strong asked if his partner sometimes had the ability to teleport, although I already knew the negative answer in advance. Vladriel, meanwhile, successfully dodged his old comrade's attacks. And the Phantom King took great pleasure in attacking the vampire again and again. But then, the Spirit King used an unexpected trick. Spirits grabbed the master from different sides. They clung to his body and prevented him from taking a single step. The named looked at his subjects with satisfaction. He called it a gift for a vampire. By gift, he meant the explosion of the corpse that happened immediately after the Lord of the Dead's words. But this insidious thinking did not work. Vladriel emerged from the cloud of dust and debris safe and sound. The named one did not expect this, so he froze for a moment in surprise. In a moment, the vampire lord was standing in front of his opponent. He laughed at such a poor attempt to kill him, and then asked the King of the Dead how much longer he was going to play, fighting less than his full strength. Ghost remarked jokingly that he needed to change his tattered clothes. and he noted that his opponent is not giving his all either. An elegant cloak has already appeared on his shoulders. The Spirit King assumed that the vampire was just trying to pass the time. But for what? Vladriel laughed. He admitted that his friend was right. The master was not going to waste his strength on this duel. He mysteriously added that soon it will be completed. The named suggested that the master is waiting for the heart of the earth to be cleansed. And at this time, the Lord of Spirits was trying on Duran's armor. And the bloodsucker noticed that he had no sense of the drama of the situation. However, everything was like that. The heart of the earth was almost ready. And this meant that the vampire's plan could soon come to life. Vladriel had already imagined how the endless ocean of magic would obey him. Just the thought of it brought a smile to his ugly face. But the Phantom King did not appreciate such large-scale plans. He mockingly noted that such a plan would lead to one thing in the end. The vampires would get a neck from one warrior. The main bloodthirsty assumed that in the battle, he had damaged not only the Lich's body, but also his mind. He couldn't believe that the young warrior he saw could do any harm. But the named one offered to make sure of this. And then Vladriel decided to change the subject and show off something important. A bloody portal formed in the floor in which the outline of a sword could be seen. This really surprised the Lord of the Dead. He opened his mouth in surprise, seeing the demonic sword, Death of the Gods, in his opponent's hands. In order not to guess in vain, the Lich asked where the vampire got the Demon King's weapon. And is this sometimes not a fake to create an image? Such an assumption offended the monster. He even got a certificate confirming the originality of the weapon. However, he added that it was not completely the Dark Lord's sword. During the last battle, Vladriel found the broken blades of a demonic weapon in the castle. Blacksmith Vulcan was able to draw another demonic sword from it. And this weapon, given a new life, is the last reincarnation of the Demon King. The monster thought that he should keep it. After all, having a powerful weapon and the heart of the earth, he will be able to revive the Dark Lord. But here he understood something else. Under such conditions, he himself can become the new Demon King. The Ghost King listened to the monologue of an old acquaintance and thought that this weapon had once brought massive destruction to the human world, and even half of that sword is dangerous. Vladriel invited the Queen of the Dead to join him and this cause before it was too late. The vampire wanted to create a new army of demons in this world, but there was no response to this proposal. The bodies of both wicked people were affected by foreign magic. They seemed to be squeezed from all sides. The named one understood that it was a gravity spell, and this greatly amused the stranger in the mask who cast this spell. Someone behind the monsters said that he didn't want to eavesdrop, but the topics of discussion were very interesting. Vice Captain Wen stepped closer and held out his hands for the demonic sword. He was going to confiscate that weapon. At first, the man thought that he should be the one asking what was going on here because he had come here to look at the famous warrior. And as a result, I came across something no less interesting. The Demon King's army did not disperse after losing. 2 of her generals met in a duel to the death in the Dwarven castle. The union of a Lich and a warrior is known, but also a vampire. It resembled a meeting of graduates. Many questions arose in view of the whole situation, but now was not the time to find answers. Wen grabbed the hilt of the sword. That was the main thing now. Vladriel also held his weapon tightly. He growled that the uninvited guest would not be able to lift this sword. The vice captain placed both hands on his sword and smiled smugly. He noted that they had not yet created a blade that a man could not lift. But several attempts to move the weapon failed. It remained motionless. The vampire lord recalled his words, adding that the sword was tied to its owner. Wen took out his flaming blade. If you kill the master, then the weapon must surrender. So the warrior stared at Vladriel, preparing to deliver the death blow. But it was not possible to complete what was planned. The vampire sword began to move on its own. This surprised everyone, even its owner. In a moment, the vice captain was repelling the attacks of the demonic weapons. He was amazed at the strength that was in her. And now this blade seemed even more valuable. The masked man holding gravity magic wanted to help his master and cover him. But at this point, the Phantom King comes into play. He asked, how could this mage be attacking anyone else when the Lord of the Dead was standing before him? Even while under a gravity spell, the named one was able to use his power. A huge spirit with a scythe in hand approached the masked mage. The mage wondered if his skills would work on a ghost that had no physical body. However, I decided to try it in practice. Gravity might not have the desired effect on ghosts, but the physical effect that can be affected occurs when the spirit attacks. So ghosts cause damage, so the laws of physics can be applied to them. That is, ghosts have mass, and therefore gravity will work on them. Scrolling all this in his head, the mage realized that gravity magic should be applied due to the induction effect. And after some time, the result of the attack lived up to expectations. The ghost began to disappear. The magician began to ponder how this ghost transformed and disappeared into the wall. Was it a quantum mechanical creature or just a bug? And at that moment, the Lord of the Dead appeared behind the masked man. He asked if the magician managed to find answers to his questions. And in a moment, he put his hand on the man's shoulder and used his dark magic. This made the mage fall to his knees. Wen turned to his friend and asked if Artfound needed any help. But the magician gathered his strength and reached for his shoulder, on which lay the phantom's hand. In a moment, the opponent disappeared behind him. The Lord of the Dead tried to reset his magical connections, but faced counteraction in response. Artfound had an incredible ability to counter magic, perhaps the same or even better than the Spirit King had, and the magic tricks used by this magician were quite unusual. Meanwhile, the demonic sword suddenly left the fight with its opponent and headed somewhere. Within moments, he was in Vladriel's hands. Ghost stood behind the vampire and said that he would still be watching the guests if it weren't for this blade. Kropovitsia did not attach much importance to this. Wen went over to his partner to make sure he was okay. The magician, holding his shoulder, assured that he was fine, only there were small problems with his magical bonds. However, this is temporary. The vice captain said that everything leads to the fact that the sacred relic will have to be used. Artfound questioned whether it was the primordial fire they were saving for the battle with Firkin the Strong. But Wen decided everything. Moreover, the partner was wounded, and in front of them were the vampire and spirit kings with a demonic sword. Therefore, with or without Voitel, the man was not going to miss such a great opportunity to hold an interesting match. After listening to the master, the magician realized that now he would have to write an explanation at least. Vladriel assured him that he had no intention of using it. However, the uninvited guests did not want to retreat. In addition, he was overwhelmed by the wild energy of the weapon. It seemed that he could kill all the people with one blow. Wen, meanwhile, opened a bottle of magic elixir. He expected something interesting from this fight, so he asked not to disappoint him. The vampire laughed and accepted the challenge, once again threatening to pulverize them all in one fell swoop. And then it turned out that the bloodsucker was not in the mood right now, so he flew away. In parting, calling Phantom Vassal and saying that he can cut himself down. Everyone just looked at him. It became clear that there would be no fight, because the main participant ran away with the sword. Wen turned to the Spirit King and asked what he planned to do now. He might want to fight them. A smile appeared on the Lich's face. He said that since the strangers were looking for Firkin, they would have to deal with him first. And then he turned to them and said that they should follow him. He will lead the guests to Voitel. And Vladriel arrived at the forge. He sought out Drua to learn of the progress with purifying the heart of the earth. No one responded to the vampire's cries, so he worried that the dwarves were idle at work. Meanwhile, the girl hid behind one of the walls and waited for an opportune moment with a hammer in her hands. And then she suddenly jumped out, shouted that she was here, and then hit the bloodsucker in the stomach. But nothing happened. Vladriel only said that this was no time for jokes and immediately asked how Earthheart was doing. The girl was somewhat bewildered, so she asked again about the heart. And then she raised her hammer again. A stone was hidden in it, so she hit the vampire hard with it again. The master was not injured, but the girl fell to the floor exhausted. The Bloodsucker Lord understood that everything was successful, so he no longer needed Drua. He raised his sword over her head. The girl closed her eyes and shouted, "It's time!" confused by this behavior of his executioner. But when Vladriel raised his head, he saw the essence of the forest under the ceiling. He was trapped. Meanwhile, Firkin and Adol climbed up the endless stairs. The warrior cast a spell that multiplied his speed. The young man asked where he learned such a skill. The man no longer remembered in which world it was, but there he watched one ragged boy. It was from him that the warrior learned this. That guy was very similar to our hero, but crazier. The young mage noted that he used to think that the man was simply out of his mind, but when he got to know him better, he realized that he was just strange. Firkin already felt tired, as if he had climbed to the 30th floor. However, the signpost informed them that they were now only on the 9th. The man began to think that they were walking in circles, but Adol told that he had heard about citadels of dwarves built right in the rocks. Therefore, each floor is really quite large. Voitel was surprised that the Korotuns live like this and always have to walk a lot. But in fact, the dwarves used the elevator for a long time and the stairs were used as a training ground. But our heroes didn't know this. The warrior got tired and sat down to rest. Adol decided that it was time to ask about something that had been bothering him for a long time. The young man wanted to understand the real reasons for forcing the man to search for that holy sword, risking everything. Firkin rolled his eyes a little and replied that he felt guilty. But the young man knew that this was not the main reason. He said that he would not believe that our hero is talking about this reason everywhere, and people all over the world continue to worship him. Statues of the warrior stand in many places on the continent, and hundreds of legends about his exploits are always heard. No one knows that he lost his sword. The only thing that is known is that he disappeared with the hero. Adol asked why the man doesn't just live a quiet life, but is obsessed with finding something that no one else thinks about. After a pause, the soldier asked the young man if he had ever lost anything. And besides, it's a cursed item that can destroy a continent in the wrong hands. The young man tried to understand. Despite everything, the warrior continued to fulfill his duties. But this conversation awakened strange feelings of obsession in the main character. His eyes opened wide. He shouted that no one but him could wield this sword. Then he exploded with emotions. The man shouted that he was sickened by the thought of some no-name impersonating a warrior, brandishing a blade or wearing it on his belt. He found the sword, so it is his treasure. Of course, a part of Firkin the Strong felt guilty. Atonement for his friends who once trusted and followed him. He had to bear this burden. After that, he looked at the young man and snorted for him to stop asking. Adol actually asked about it just like that. Then they returned to their mission. The warrior used the spell again to get to the top faster. The young man looked after him and thought. He didn't know if Firkin was being honest with him, but for a moment he noticed the maddened fire in the hero's eyes. The forest entity jumped onto Vladril's back and knocked him to the floor. This really came as a surprise to the vampire. Zdrovan tried to land strong blows on his opponent, but it was a difficult task because of the sword. The bloodsucker fought back with weapon magic. The cheer was knocked back by a shockwave, and he ended up next to Drua. The bloodsucker asked them how they became friends and what happened to his two subordinates. An hour ago, the essence of the forest came to the forge. He frightened the dwarves present there because they had never seen anyone like him before. Velet held motionless vampires on his shoulders and told the dwarves that he had come to save them. The dwarves recognized the Magister as a blood drinker. They only recently treated the workers as useless. While the smiths settled scores with the monsters, Drua asked who the mysterious visitor was. Zdrovan said that while he was looking for the locked-up little creatures, he came across these Shabai goals and the armadillo that brought him here. The girl did not understand anything from this confused story. She was afraid to trust someone she didn't know at all. For the same with such a menacing look, the essence of the forest decided to tell everything in a different way. He placed his hand on Drua's head. The craftswoman's partners decided that she needed help with this monster, but she stopped them. Now she began to understand what he wanted to tell the giant. He communicated the information to her through touch. Now the girl was sure that the entity was here to save them. And she also learned that Lord Leric was also safe. The other dwarves also wanted to see what Drua did. Zdrovan quickly showed them everything and assured them that it was impossible to delay. Time is not on their side. The girl decided to show the savior something. She pushed back her hair and craned her neck. The essence noticed that the craftswoman has a short neck, but she pointed to 2 bite marks. This is a heritage label. All who have one must obey the vampire's orders. And she added that she does not have a short neck at all. The only way to remove this mark is to kill whoever placed it. Drua couldn't leave the dwarves and just walk away. And then she added again that she has a very long neck. The essence of the forest wondered what he should do now. That girl, holding the heart of the earth, asked him to share the power. After all, this could help destroy the enemy. The giant agreed to help. The craftswoman, in her turn, thanked her and then asked how she could contact the savior. This made him think. Vladriel swung his sword, threatening to cut everyone down for disobeying and trying to fight him. But the essence of the forest parried the blow of the blade with the hammer that contained the heart of the earth. Strovan held his weapon in his hand and realized that he would have to make some effort to smother the mosquito. But Vampire was fast. He dodged blows, kept a safe distance and gained a lot of speed. He even wondered how his opponent, a huge creature, could be so weak. And Velit did not know how to use weapons. What can we say about the power of the magic stone, which was not even half used? Therefore, Vladriel did not take his opponent seriously. But 2 of his subjects were dead, so it is possible that the big man had some trump card up his sleeve. So Vampire decided to end the fight as soon as possible. But at that moment, a huge stone block fell on the master, pressing him to the floor. It was all planned by the dwarves. They prepared to pull the chain at Drua's first signal, and when the master was trapped, it was up to the essence of the forest. He took a hammer and began to finish off the enemy. After some time, everything around the giant was broken. The result of his efforts was debris, a mountain of debris and stones. The vampire was somewhere overwhelmed by it all. The dwarves watched this battle. They were even a little disappointed by such an uninteresting ending. One of the Koratuns said that when it was finished, he would go to his homeland and propose to his beloved. But it was still far from the end. Something began to happen in the precipice, which was formed by the strong blows of the hammer. A mystical light filled everything around. The dwarves realized that the vampire lord was rising again. However, they were optimistic and thought that now they themselves would be able to deal with him with one left. But Drua roared at them to hide. The girl felt that it was not Vladriel's power. It radiates something different, wild. The essence of the forest felt it too. He was going to save the Koratuns from this dark energy with a hammer. Grabbing his weapon, the big man charged. But Lord Magister grabbed the hammer with one hand and pulled out the heart of the earth. The bloodsucker was only surprised how such a huge creature did not take advantage of the power of the stone. The dwarves watched all this and whispered in fear, wondering how the vampire pulled out the magic stone with one hand. It even reminded them of a scene from some popular work. The essence of the forest did not wait long. He grabbed Vladriel's head in his hands and used his mind control power. His enemy suggested that this must be his hidden ability, but it was a difficult task. The vampire became very strong and put up a strong resistance. But our big man did not give up. He grabbed the bloodsucker's head again and continued to penetrate his mind. But suddenly Velit saw that Vampire grabbed the sword and threw it in the direction of the Koratuns. The forest essence rushed towards the dwarves. The sword flew straight at Drua and at the last moment pierced the body of the big man, who covered the girl with himself. The sword flew out of his body and the essence said quietly that he always does what he can. Meanwhile, a debilitated Vladriel muttered something about this body, the Mosquito King of Vampires. But very soon he came to his senses. The sword was in his hands again. Only the head hurt terribly from the recent session. And the master was quite surprised when he saw in his hand a magical stone that shone as if filled with fire. Then the bloodsucker saw Drua bending over the bloody giant. She asked what his words meant. The forest essence told him that a warrior had taught him to say this phrase when he failed. Vladriel exclaimed that this was all very silly. And then he said that everyone should get ready. He threatened that he could kill them all in an instant, but he was going to show his mercy and make them a meal in honor of the Dark Lord's return. As the Vampire Lord flew away, Drua raised her head and said that they had finally managed to retrieve one stone. Meanwhile, Fairkin and Adol reached their destination. The warrior could hardly catch his breath from fatigue. The place resembled a battle arena. And no one was visible here. Only the thick smell of blood was in the air. And when Voitel looked around, he saw dead dwarves on the floor. Their bloody bodies lay everywhere around. Wen followed the Ghost King and tried to understand why he joined the warrior. Does this mean he has become a servant of Firkin? The man could not trust the Lord of the Dead, the demon, the enemy. But the Lich objected, precisely because he was a demon and trustworthy, because he was ready to betray our main character at any moment. These words interested the partner of the vice-captain. However, Wen immediately told Artfound not to trust the named one, as he is a great liar. The Lich smiled. It was true, but he had nothing to lose. The warrior still gets angry, and this is always interesting to watch. The vice-captain asked how they could get up there. After all, the prospect of climbing on one's own two did not look too attractive. A hole in the floor could be seen on the landing in front of the stairs. The Lord of the Dead remarked that it was not that difficult to find Firkin the Strong. Because of his character, nothing remains intact. The warriors talked among themselves whether they still needed the named one, because they had received all the information. But Artfound still insisted that the number could still agree. Assessing the destruction that appeared as traces here and there, the Lich said that Firkin had gone to the top floor. Wen remarked that it sounded too confident. The Phantom King was responsible for his words, because he could feel the terrifying aura of death from there. Adol looked around the room and noted that the place looked like a slaughterhouse. The warrior asked if there were any surviving dwarves here. The guy didn't see any, but no sooner had he said this than a cough and heavy breathing could be heard from the depths of the room. A small voice asked who was here. One still managed to survive. A man was sitting near the column, bloodied and weak. Firkin leaned over the wounded man and asked how he was. The warrior wanted to know what had happened here, so he asked if the dwarf could speak. But the dwarf desperately grabbed the warrior by the collar and shouted that they should run away from here as soon as possible. The hero calmly removed his hand from himself and asked not to choke. The man apologized embarrassedly. He just wanted to convey important information. The dwarf said that there was almost no time left. After all, very soon this place will become a veritable hell. Our heroes tried to calm the wounded man, saying that he shouldn't worry. This place was already hell. The dwarf was breathing heavily from his wounds. However, he said that the ritual, which was being prepared here, will be held not only here. Corridors of the castle, the building itself, the fortress. All this was already inhabited by the corpses of innocent Corotans. All the mountains of corpses, the aura of death pressing on everything around, everything in this mountain and the mountain itself will become a huge magic circle. Every living creature here will become a sacrifice. The man grabbed our main character with a hand that was bleeding. He then advised that before all this happened, the warriors had better flee from here as quickly as possible. After that, the dwarf fell silent. Adol approached and closed his eyes with his hand, saying that he may rest in peace. But the man opened his eyes. He said he wasn't dead yet. This was a surprise for the young man. Firkin confirmed that a dwarf does not look exactly like someone who dies. And then he handed him a bottle of potion. While the wounded man drank the medicine, he still continued to talk about the preparation for the second coming of the Demon King. He insisted that our heroes flee from here while they had the chance. The potion worked quickly, and the dwarf enjoyed being able to breathe without pain. And the warrior and Adol were going to look for the survivors. There were a few more bottles of elixir for them. Our main character was surprised at such devotion of demons. These nearby creatures wanted to resurrect someone who was already alive. But then the man wondered if the Dark Lord was really still alive. Maybe he died in the sack. Then he hit hard, and Arl could finish from the inside. But it is not known whether it is possible to die in the vestibule. The next question that made Voitel think was whether he should now save the prisoner, and he said out loud that the Demon King could be banished from the human world. Therefore, he even wonders how embarrassing it will be if he's revived again. In general, it was hard to believe that the demons had staged such a massacre for the sake of saving their king. The warrior once again confirmed the correctness of his thoughts that these wicked people are like pests and they must be destroyed. Firkin came here for the heart of Earth, but everything turned upside down. Leaving after all he had learned was impossible. Therefore, he decided that he should also take the heart of the mosquito, the Lord of Vampires. Adol, meanwhile, was looking for the living. He thought that he should pray for the repose of those whom he could no longer help. Just as our protagonist thought about where to look for the vampire responsible for this carnage, the elevator doors opened and Vladriel entered the room, extolling the technology of the dwarves. Seeing the guests in front of him, the bloodthirsty was surprised, especially from the presence here of warrior Firkin the Strong. The man stood with eyes full of hatred and anger. He kept his eyes on the vampire, and then he exploded with emotion. He shouted a question to the Lord Magister if there really was an elevator. Vladriel was surprised and then understood. The vampire called our hero not a warrior, but a barbarian fighting the gifts of civilization. But it did not matter whether a warrior or a barbarian stood before him. The bloodthirster was about to sacrifice the demon queen and the warrior. Firkin was annoyed at how much effort and time had been wasted, and that he would have to deal with the evil's plans. So now he was going to take his anger out on the vampire. For Vladriel, this turned out to be a great chance to sacrifice a hero to his master. So he took out his demon sword. Our hero noted irritably that everyone began to draw their aura weapons. And then I felt something familiar for a long time. This energy came from the blade. The master laughed when he saw this reaction. Finally, Firkin noticed. The hero must recognize this weapon, and memories from the distant past came to mind. Then the warrior lost to the Dark Lord in battle. The latter aimed his sword straight at the warrior's throat. One day, the Demon King screamed so loudly that it deafened all the celestial creatures. Under the absolute superiority of his formidable army, the earth trembled, cruel and ruthless. The demonic nature that had been contained for centuries broke out and rushed like a mountain stream, making its presence known to the people. All living things were trampled and destroyed. But the darkest shadow is always dispelled by light. Finally, a hero appeared, ready to challenge the great butcher, warrior and demon king. Light and darkness. It was a battle between two rivals of equal strength. They fought so inevitably that it seemed their fate to be against each other. But there was something that only one of them had, what even the gods were afraid of. Blessings and curses, birth and death. What the Demon King had that the warrior did not have was a broken and incomplete artifact. Our hero tried without weapons to defeat the opponent with tricks, but in vain. To save his life, he had to run. But fate does not let go so easily. The sword of revenge was in the hands of the warrior, a sword designed to stop destruction, a sword that destroys demons, sword of light, holy sword, a sword whose analogues have never been seen before. Its existence was unprecedented, and its power so powerful that the name Magic Sword was not appropriate. Therefore, he received many names. A holy sword given to a demon to kill other demons. The only weapon capable of destroying the Demon King and giving mankind hope for the future and rebirth. Until the hero lost it. 30 years ago, our main character stood in front of his opponent and tried to find his sword in a magic bag. The warrior had already begun to despair. He scrolled through all the places he had been in his head, trying to remember where he had left the blade. But his rival didn't care much. The Demon King swung his sword to strike. Dodging the attacks, Firkin shouted that only a demon lord could attack an unarmed person. This is appalling and despicable behavior. The Dark Lord noticed that the warrior was mocking him, but he was fighting in armor for you. However, he said that we would wait until the opponent armed himself. The warrior noted the demon's sense of honor, then drew his pistol and fired directly at him. But the efforts were in vain. Although the attack was unexpected, the Dark Lord stopped all the bullets. He wondered how far the hero could go. The next moment, Firkin attacked with an ultra-super-modern MK2 plasma collector. He shouted that it was better to win by underhand tricks than to lose. But even this weapon could not cause any damage to the demon. These were just children's toys for him. But then, as the enemy's confidence grew and their vigilance dulled, Firkin the Strong drew his sword and struck. The man shouted that even without the holy sword he would destroy all the demons, desperately rushing to attack. But repelling such a blow cost the Dark Lord nothing. The warrior's blade crumbled into small pieces. But he was not going to give up. Pulling out his gun, he presses the hook, continuing his attempts to somehow harm his opponent. The last such desperate attempt was a blow to the head with the handle of the pistol. But the Demon King put an end to these attempts, giving the hero a good blow. As a result, he flew back a few meters. The armor protected the warrior. Without her, he would have been torn in two. And although he assumed such a possibility, he still did not have enough strength to somehow counter it. The Demon King, tired of his opponent's tricks, said that he would burn everything around until the hero lost his last hope. The warrior fell to his knees, watching his treasures and pensions, which he had been collecting since he was 16, burn. Everything disappeared in the fire. The man clutched his head in despair. First, he lost the holy sword, and now the rest of the magical and important items. He hoped it was a dream, and his brain was playing tricks on him. The Dark Lord approached him and said that he enjoyed the performance the warrior put on. But what will he do next, without a holy sword or something equally powerful? Despair and anger took over our hero. He wanted the Demon King to face off. Of course, if he had a gun, things would be different now. Firkin stood in front of a wall of flames. He turned to his opponent, asking if he really wanted to experience the power of the holy sword like that. The Dark Lord replied that he was simply bored. The warrior slowly approached the wall and continued to speak. He reprimanded the demon, saying that if he was so interested in assessing the power of a sword, he just had to find the blade. The man said that the opponent should wait for him. Until then, this battle will be postponed. But the Dark Lord was not satisfied with such a plan. He caught up with the trickster and swung his sword, smashing the column behind which the warrior managed to hide. And then he put the blade to Firkin's throat. The man was still trying to negotiate and postpone the duel until he found his sword, but all efforts were in vain. The Demon King did not relent. He raised his weapon and struck, wanting only one thing: the death of our hero. The warrior survived, but a large scar can be seen on his face from that time. Vladriel now stood before the warrior with a demon sword. He noticed that the man had a strange complexion. It looks like the warrior is scared to death. Firkin tried to keep himself in his hands and not pretend that something was wrong. But drops of sweat glistened treacherously on his forehead. The man brushed it off, saying he just had PTSD. Adol noticed that something strange was happening with his friend. The guy came up to him and put his hand on his shoulder, asking if everything was okay. And at that moment, the warrior remembered how, with a bloody face, he waited for death at the hands of the Dark Lord. And how, at the last moment, someone stood in front of him with a flaming sword and a light shield, protecting him from the enemy. When the unknown warrior turned around to ask if our main character was okay, it turned out to be a young Adol. Firkin, the strong, snapped back to reality and glared at the young man before telling his friend that he was fine. The Dark Lord's palace 30 years ago. Stunned by the news of Arul's death, the human king stared despondently at the pocket-sized magical pouch. Gerba was a heavy burden on his heart. Suddenly, the emperor called out his friend's name longingly. The subordinate knights tried to calm the heir to the throne, not understanding why he was grabbing the bag. However, the king of men angrily told them that there was some in the bag. It was hard for the knights to believe that someone could enter the wicket. Crying bitterly, the future emperor turned to Arul through the bag and demanded an explanation of his action. Suddenly, Hummin and Ganyuan decided to immediately pull his friend out of the trap and drew his sword. But Firkin the Strong clung to the hand of the heir to the throne and prevented him from doing so. The conqueror addressed the king of men that he understood his feelings. However, he persistently asked to stop. After all, both of them perfectly understood that Ulfrin should not be freed. It was thanks to his sacrifice that the Demon King was also sealed inside the pouch. But by the time the bag opens, the imprisoned Dark Lord will be released. The warrior, with sadness in his eyes, asked his comrade if Arul's self-sacrifice would then be in vain. Refuting these words, Inganyuan claimed that it was not a victim, but simply the death of a friend. He grabbed the warrior by the throat, trying to strangle him. The future emperor blamed Firkin for the fact that, due to his stupid mistakes, Bendel had first died, and now Arul had also suffered. The warrior did not resist. With closed eyes, he calmly listened to the angry cry. The enraged king of men released his hand, and the interlocutor fell to the ground. The heir emphasized that this would not have happened if the warrior had not lost that three-cursed blade. The future emperor emotionally noted that he, and not Firkin, should have become the chosen one of the sacred sword. The winner was very sorry and apologized for everything. However, Voitel noted that it is not only his fault, because friends should also be more prudent. The warrior made every effort, but fortune was not on his side. He still didn't consider himself guilty of losing the sword, which disappeared by itself. The human king said that his words were complete nonsense, and Firkin the Strong agreed that his story sounded like an excuse. But in any case, he takes all the responsibility. Haman asked what the warrior was going to do next, or was he just planning to escape after all? Voitel did not immediately answer the question. Approaching his dead friend, he said that Bendel's last words were to be buried next to the cabin in which he lived. That is why the warrior wants to deal with this case to the end. He promised that it would take a little time and he would definitely return soon, but only after he found the sacred sword, the present day. The Lord of the Iron Empire pondered whether Firkin the Strong thought that 30 years was not much time. Hermann Ganyuan cursed. In those days, he could not imagine that Voitel would be able to steal the bag and run away with it. But he was most interested in what he was going to do with her. Even though a lot of time had passed, the human king took advantage of this delay to complete his training. Ganyuan was in the room with the conquered blades. He announced himself as the one who would finally unravel the knot that Firkin the Strong had failed to untie. Hundreds of magical swords and noble phantoms. The emperor had to go through an incredible number of wars and battles to obtain them. For now, only one thing remains: save Arl Olfrin. Captain Commandos approached the human king and informed him that the warrior's location had been clearly identified. The first order of chivalry in full had arrived and were ready to march under His Majesty's command. The commander assured that there will be no second failure. Instead, they must prepare carefully so as not to miss the chance to reach the winner. The emperor reminded the knights not to forget to take the pouch from the warrior, even if it meant risking their own lives. Firkin the Strong and Adol stood opposite Vladriel. The latter noted that the atmosphere has become completely different. He thought of a movie in which the main character, after reminiscing about his past, was finally able to master himself. Stretching his muscles after the strain, our main character agreed that he felt something similar. However, he added that the past must remain in the past, as nothing can be changed except to face reality face to face. The warrior noted that the vampire skillfully handled the dwarves, and then asked if Vladriel was really going to resurrect the Demon King. Komar confirmed that he wanted to create a lich so that the whole world would become demonic again. However, he intends to make some adjustments. After that, the Vampire King, looking at the sword, reported that it was talking to him. The blade told him that the mosquito Vladriel would become the new Demon Lord. The winner denied this. The bloodsucker was offended and asked if he really wanted to have an educational conversation with him. Firkin the Strong wanted to clarify who was the main among them, the demon or his sword. Komar irritably stated that of course he wields the sword and by no means the other way around. The warrior then added why the vampire was letting the sword control him. But the bloodsucker did not understand what the warrior meant, because it is thanks to this blade that he can become the Demon King. The warrior stressed that the mosquito's life belonged only to Vladriel, so he should give up the sword to Firkin and do what he wants. The Vampire King forgot about his aspirations, but declared that his own desire at this moment was to kill the warrior and his companion. And at the same moment, the mosquito swung his sword, but the opponent reacted in time, defending himself from the unexpected attack. Vladriel stated that our warrior's words tempt him more than the demonic sword. Looking at the deep cuts on his hands, the conqueror reprimanded the demon's lack of sympathy for him. Then he added that the mosquito could not even imagine the full power of the voice of this blade. It contains hundreds of souls who boldly and arrogantly wielded the sword. But in the end, they were consumed by his madness. There are even people who are looking for it all their lives. Of course, we are not talking about Firkin. Vampire was fed up with these antics, and he emphasized that this situation does not encourage conversations or concern for each other. Vladriel ordered our hero to be silent and watch him. Mosquito spread his fingers. A magic crystal shone in his palm. He announced that a new Demon King would soon appear. Firkin the Strong was shocked by what he saw. He asked in amazement if this was really the heart of the earth. Voitel thanked Vampire for working as a courier for him and bringing him this thing. The warrior warned the bloodthirsty that the heart must be treated with all care, as it has great value. Ignoring any words of our hero, Vladriel placed a crystal stone on his chest. Firkin cursed wildly. He was amazed that the interlocutor did not listen to him completely and made the heart of the earth unusable because it was already in use. It was at this time that the elevator doors opened. The knights of the First Order came out of it together with the Spirit King. Lord of the Dead said it was quite noisy. If you have watched this far, I am very grateful to you. I hope you enjoyed this video because I put a lot of effort into creating it. I would be very grateful if you like this video and subscribe to the channel.